How Israel was created.
On November 2nd, 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, wrote a letter that would set off a conflict still being fought more than 100 years later.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object.
When Balfour wrote of his government's intent to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine, 90% of the people living there were not Jewish. Just 31 years later, most of them were gone.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
לא ספרתי. אני לא יכול לדעת בחיי. היה לי מקלע עם 250 כדורים.
This is the story of the British promise that led to the destruction of Palestine and the creation of the State of Israel. Let's start with the obvious question. Why were the British making promises about other people's countries? The short answer? Empire is one hell of a drug. This was World War I, and the British were making lots of promises. In addition to promising a Jewish homeland in Palestine, they promised Arab leaders independence if they rose up against Britain's enemy, the Ottoman Empire. The Arabs did. Hollywood even made a movie about it.
Arabia's for the Arabs now. That's what I've told them anyway. That's what they think. That's why they're fighting.
Oh, surely.
A month after Balfour's letter, British troops took Palestine, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule. The people who lived there were Arabs, mostly Muslims, but there were Christian and Jewish minorities too. There was also a tiny number of European Jews who in the late 1800s had started building small colonies there. At a time when many Jews were suffering horrific persecution in Europe, they felt Palestine could be an escape. The idea of building up a Jewish presence in Palestine became known as Zionism, but it stayed a fringe movement among European Jews. Many of them felt they shouldn't have to leave their countries to avoid persecution. But Zionism as a political movement took a big step forward with an Austrian man called Theodor Herzl. And this guy is a very important name in this story. In 1896, he published Der Judenstaat, or in English, The Jewish State. In it, he said the only way for Jews to avoid Europe's anti-Semitism was not just to leave, but to have their own country. And Herzl didn't just write. The next year, he organized a conference in Basel, Switzerland, the first Zionist Congress. The attendees agreed on a program which sought, among other things, to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine and promote Jewish settlement in Palestine. From here on out, the Zionist movement became very active, setting up funds to promote Jewish immigration to Palestine, companies to buy land there, and recruiting representatives to advocate for their cause with different governments. A few days after the conference, Herzl wrote this in his diary.
At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. In 5 years perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it.
He was only off by 1 year.
The Israel-Palestine conflict.
One of the biggest myths about the Israel-Palestine conflict is that it's been going on for centuries, all about ancient religious hatreds. In fact, while religion is involved, conflict's mostly about two groups of people who claim the same land, and it really only goes back about a century to the early 1900s. Around then, the region along the eastern Mediterranean we now call Israel-Palestine, been under Ottoman rule for centuries, was religiously diverse, including mostly Muslims and Christians, also a small number of Jews who lived generally in peace. It was changing in two important ways. First, more people in the region were developing a sense of being not just ethnic Arabs, but Palestinians, a distinct national identity. At the same time, not so far away in Europe, more Jews were joining a movement called Zionism, which said that Judaism was not just a religion, but a nationality, one that deserved a nation of its own. And after centuries of persecution, many believed a Jewish state was their only way of safety and saw their historic homeland in the Middle East as their best hope for establishing it. In the first decades of the 20th century, tens of thousands of European Jews moved there. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and British and French empires carved up the Middle East, the British taking control of a region it called the British Mandate for Palestine. At first, the British allowed Jewish immigration. But as more Jews arrived, settling into farming communities, tension between Jews and Arabs grew. Both sides committed acts of violence, and by the 1930s, the British began limiting Jewish immigration. In response, Jewish militias formed to fight both the local Arabs and to resist British rule. Then came the Holocaust, leading many more Jews to flee Europe for British Palestine and galvanizing much of the world in support of a Jewish state. In 1947, as sectarian violence between Jews and Arabs there grew, the United Nations approved a plan to divide British Palestine into two separate states. One for Jews, Israel, and one for Arabs, Palestine. The city of Jerusalem, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians all have holy sites, was to become a special international zone. The plan was meant to give Jews a state, to establish Palestinian independence, and to end the sectarian violence that the British could no longer control. The Jews accepted the plan, and they declared independence as Israel. But Arabs throughout the region saw the UN plan as just more European colonialism trying to steal their land. Many of the Arab states, who had just recently won independence themselves, declared war on Israel in an effort to establish a unified Arab Palestine where all of British Palestine had been. The new state of Israel won the war, but in the process they pushed well past their borders under the UN plan, taking the western half of Jerusalem and much of the land that was to have been part of Palestine. They also expelled huge numbers of Palestinians from their homes, creating a massive refugee population whose descendants today number about 7 million. At the end of the war, Israel controlled all of the territory except for Gaza, which Egypt controlled, and the West Bank, named because it's west of the Jordan River, which Jordan controlled. This was the beginning of the decades-long Arab-Israeli conflict. During this period, many Jews in Arab-majority countries fled or were expelled, arriving in Israel. Then something happened that transformed the conflict. In 1967, Israel and the neighboring Arab states fought another war. When it ended, Israel had seized the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank from Jordan, and both Gaza and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. Israel was now occupying the Palestinian territories, including all of Jerusalem and its holy sites. This left Israel responsible for governing the Palestinians, a people it had fought for decades.
So in 1958, one of the things that we're looking at is, well, two of the things we're looking at is, one, how do we prevent Iraq from joining Syria and Egypt? Right, as Iraq is breaking away from the British Empire, its immediate stated goal was to merge with Egypt and Syria in the United Arab Republic. We don't want that to happen because there's a possibility that the Arabs will create a large, stable, socialist state that'll have a lot of petroleum wealth, and it'll probably use that petroleum wealth for its own internal development, and it'll probably use that petroleum wealth to make itself into an actual power. We don't want anything to do with that. We want Arabs broken up into as many states as possible so that they can bicker amongst each other and backstab and kill each other, and we can divide and conquer. Their first action is done by Miles Copeland, and what he does is in 1949, he overthrows the fledgling democracy in Syria. It'll destabilize Syria so catastrophically it takes 21 years for Syria to get back on its feet. Interestingly enough, it gets back on its feet because of a tyrant named Hafez al-Assad. When he dies, his son takes over. His son's name is Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad is the current guy that we hate so much in Syria. So in effect, if you really hate Bashar al-Assad, you have nobody to blame except yourself for setting up Syria for this tyranny after overthrowing their democracy in 1949. In 1953, Kermit Roosevelt, feeling really jealous and left out because he didn't get to overthrow a democracy, he'll be the one who masterminds the overthrow of the Iranian democracy. And the effect of this, of course, is that it creates lots of chaos. We decided that we should test Saddam Hussein out. That it wasn't just enough that he was on the CIA payroll, it wasn't just enough that we had worked with him in the past and we had established this nice relationship with him in the 60s. We wanted to really test him. And so what we did was we produced a list of several hundred Iraqis that we didn't like. They were mostly socialists, they were university professors, scientists, just people that in general you don't like, right? The riffraff of the world, the guys, the big thinkers. And so we produced the list and we handed it to Saddam Hussein with no instructions. We didn't say anything bad about the guys. We just went, well, I mean, we did. We said we don't like these people. They're in your country. So Saddam Hussein mass arrested the whole lot of them, He did a handful of kangaroo court trials where they were going to be found guilty, but all at the same time, like there'd be like 100 defendants at a time. And then the judge, bam, guilty. And then he hanged them all live on TV, prime time, all state-owned channels. And we went, yeah, that's our guy. That's artistry. We didn't tell him what to do. He was making it up as he went. You don't like these guys? Done. I got it for you. The CIA goes in there and cleans it up by assassinating Qasem in 1963. That triggers 13 years of chaos in Iraq, where there's one coup after the other. And it finally settles in the mid-70s when a person on the CIA payroll, Saddam Hussein, who had actually been involved in a government in the 60s, but that got overthrown in a coup, basically gets involved in another government in the 70s. He's not the president initially, but it becomes pretty clear pretty early on that he is super powerful. He wields a lot of influence. The actual president is sick and dying, and Saddam Hussein is sort of in the back running the show.
And the rest are just limp and done for and almost dying with relief that it wasn't them. It's the most extraordinary live show of a real, for keeps, political purge that you'll ever see. And then there's the second half, which has been seen by much fewer people and was not shown on PBS, where the surviving half are told to go out in the yard and are given guns and are told to shoot the convicted half. Now they're in the plot. Now they are cemented to the leadership. Now, Kanan Makir in his book says correctly, he says, Hitler wouldn't have thought of that. Stalin didn't even think of that, and he thought about these things a lot, about how to get one member of the Central Committee to betray another member and keep them all guessing so that you're the ultimate beneficiary. But this is that added little touch of sadomasochism, and the rest are just limp and done for and almost dying with relief that it wasn't them. It's the most extraordinary live show of a real, for keeps, political purge that you'll ever see. And then there's the second half, which has been seen by much fewer people and was not shown on PBS, where the surviving half are told to go out in the yard and are given guns and are told to shoot the convicted half. Now they're in the plot. Now they are cemented to the leadership. Now, Kanan Makir in his book says correctly, he says, Hitler wouldn't have thought of that. Stalin didn't even think of that, and he thought about these things a lot, about how to get one member of the Central Committee to betray another member and keep them all guessing so that you're the ultimate beneficiary. But this is that added little touch of sadomasochism.
The complication is the Ayatollah Khomeini. So Khomeini had been in France, but the French didn't really want him anymore, and he goes to Iraq. Iraq, because Saddam Hussein is basically one of our allies in the region, although it's kind of a weird relationship. But that means that we effectively have control of the Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, we had seen how fundamentalist Muslims could be advantageous to us in our foreign policy pursuits. For example, we were funding fundamentalist Muslims in Egypt because we realized that if we funded the Muslim Brotherhood, it destabilized the socialist government that we hated. And so this is a great tactic for us. So the way everybody who was in the intelligence field saw the Ayatollah Khomeini being in Iraq was this was a person you could use if you needed to in Iran. So he's sort of like a reserve emergency tool. What the hell was our money doing? Why would we do that? I'm still trying to figure that out. The only thing I can figure out is that the CIA was using them to mint currency so that they could have currency instantaneously. Because that was our CIA headquarters for all Asia operations. So everything we were doing in China, or Thailand, or the Philippines, or India, or Pakistan, we were doing it out of Tehran, out of our embassy in Tehran. And so we had put all our eggs into Iran, and the Iranians hated us at this point because we had stuck them with 26 years of tyranny. We had overthrown their democracy. They were done with us. They have a revolution, and they want to go the other direction. They want to reject American culture. They see American culture as tyranny imposed upon them by the Shah of Iran. In 1953, we overthrew their democracy. Iran ended up in a quarter century of tyranny. But that tyranny was really strange because it was also very pro-US. So pro-US, people began calling, a nickname for Iran became the Little United States. Another one was the shopping mall of the Middle East. I think, I'm pretty sure this is true, that bleach, the #1 consumer of bleach in the world became Iran. That every woman in Iran had a nose job and her hair was blonde. Like it was a country of blondes. Like they had a higher percentage of blondes than Sweden does. It was incredible. And of course, right, Iranians are pretty much all black hair. So this is like just a lot of bleach consumption. In 1981, the Iranian government decapitates its military. And I mean literally. They purged the generals. They purged the admirals. The Air Force generals just flew out of the country. They escaped. But a bunch of the army generals get caught, and they just literally decapitate them. And then what Iran does is they say, look, we're all equal. We don't need any more generals and admirals. It's a little irrational. And so the Iranian Navy ends up being commanded by captains. And they actually managed to put up a good fight because they're going to have to, because we talk Iraq, our proxy state, into attacking Iran in 1981. And so we tell Saddam Hussein, release the Ayatollah Khomeini, send him. Because here's our thinking. If Iran goes fundamentalist, they'll never be able to work with the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union is atheist, right? Because Marxists believe religion is the opiate of the masses. So how could a fundamentalist state and a Marxist state cooperate? So even though we're going to lose Iran, either way, if it goes fundamentalist or it goes communist, we lose Iran. We figured at least the Soviet Union wouldn't get it. And of course, once the fundamentalists get the upper hand in the revolution, they mass execute the communists. And the communists are like falling over each other to get out of Iran. And it works. And the Iranian revolution becomes an Islamic revolution instead of another communist revolution. And then Iran and Iraq end up in this 8-year-long nightmare war, which reminds everybody of World War I. It's trench warfare. It's going nowhere. The Iraqis are catastrophically outnumbered, and the Iraqis are wondering how they're going to extract themselves from this. Iraq immediately starts to make gestures to surrender, but you know they're hoping to get well, let's go back to the old border surrender, not a real surrender. And Ayatollah Khomeini goes, never, you attacked us, we're going to fight this war to the end, you're going to pay for this. And we realize that there is a distinct possibility Iraq is going to collapse. That, you know, our attempt to get a vengeance war against Iran may have just backfired on us. Because if Iran conquers Iraq, it's going to turn our new enemy in the Middle East into a superpower. And so we begin funding and arming the Iraqis as fast as we can. The reason that Iraq wants to do this is the part of Iran that has the oil is the Arabic-speaking part. So what Iraq is going to do is they're going to claim that they're attacking Iran to liberate their fellow Arabs in Iran, which is going to be a huge boon to Iraq's oil production and will make Iraq psychotically rich if they can pull this off. Now, they should have known they couldn't because Iraq is 1/3 the size of Iran, both in terms of territory and in terms of population. And so, you know, that's a tough fight when you're outnumbered 3-1. But we convinced them that they could do it because the CIA had convinced Saddam Hussein that Iran's military was in total disarray from having been decapitated, and that the Iranians would not be capable of putting together a decent fight. It turns out to be totally wrong.
אבל אנחנו הולכים למסלול התנגשות עם הממשל האמריקאי. ארצות הברית זה לא מקשה אחת, זה לא מקשה אחת. יש את הסנאט, יש את הקונגרס, יש את הכוח היהודי שהוא עצום, יותר חזק משהיה אי פעם. יש דעת קהל, יש לנו כוחות כבירים בדעת הקהל שמתנגדים למדיניות הזאת, גדולי הפרשנים. אמריקה לא תכפה עלינו דבר. One
One of the most important wars of the last 50 years is one that we don't hear about much. When, in 1980, two of the Middle East's most powerful countries, Iran and Iraq, waged 8 years of some of the worst trench and chemical warfare since World War I, leaving both countries devastated. This is the war that fractured the Middle East into lines that still play out in nearly every conflict there today. It set the US and Iraq on a path that ultimately led to the American invasion, and it defined Iran's often hostile relationship with the wider world. This is the Iran-Iraq War. It's 1979, and Iran is in the middle of a revolution. The country is coming off of decades of being ruled by the Shah, a king that the US and UK had installed in the 50s after covertly overthrowing Iran's democratically elected leader. But after years of the Shah's corrupt autocratic rule, a mass uprising violently overthrows him, creating what becomes an Islamic republic, headed by an Ayatollah named Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini and a group of Shia religious scholars want to impose fundamentalist rule on the country, and are hostile to both the Western powers and the neighboring Soviet Union. They establish a military force called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which is meant to protect their hold on the revolution and to suppress the other groups who helped overthrow the Shah. The US is watching all of this in shock. Their biggest ally in the region and a major oil producer has just turned from friend to fierce enemy. But the biggest tremors of this revolution are felt in the rest of the Middle East. Iran sends out radio broadcasts to Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Kuwait, and Iraq, calling for people to rise up and overthrow their own rulers. They're trying to export their revolution to their neighbors, to gain new allies in the region. Neighboring leaders, most of them Sunni Muslim, don't like this. Saudi Arabia's king fears being overthrown, just like the Shah was. And in Iraq, Saddam Hussein sees this Shia religious revolution on his eastern border and worries that the Shia majority that he rules over will rise up against him too. But he also sees this as an opportunity. Iran and Iraq have been fighting over this border territory for years. This waterway is a critical access point to the Persian Gulf, where both countries export their oil to the rest of the world. In a treaty between the two back in 1975, Saddam had to give up full control of this waterway, as well as access to oil-rich regions in what was now Iran. Saddam hates this treaty and is considering taking the waterway back by force. The Iranian Revolution has left the country weak and fractured. Khomeini and his Revolutionary Guard are still fighting other political factions for control. The Iranian military, which used to be funded and trained by the United States, is now weak, its leaders having been jailed or executed after the revolution. Iran's military would normally be able to crush Iraq in an invasion, but maybe not anymore. Saddam sees this as an opportunity to weaken a major rival. Saddam is also riding on a delusion that he himself is going to unify the Arab world under his leadership. If he invades Iran, maybe the rest of the Middle East will rally behind him against this new common enemy. He thinks it'll be a quick victory. So in September of 1980, he decides to prepare 10,000 Iraqi troops to cross the border to invade Iran. What's about to happen here isn't just the start of a new war. Saddam is kicking off a dynamic that will dominate the Middle East for more than 40 years. The fight between revolutionary change and status quo power. The war officially starts when Saddam sends his air force over the border in a surprise attack on Iranian air bases. His 10,000 soldiers cross from Basra into southern Iran. Further north, Saddam opens a second front to seize strategically located border towns and put pressure on his enemy. These air attacks mostly fail, and Iran responds with airstrikes of their own into Iraqi territory, hitting oil facilities. Iran still has sophisticated jets that the United States had given the previous regime. This gives them an edge in the air. The war quickly sucks in the rest of the region. Israel is among the first. It wants to keep these two adversaries occupied, fighting with each other, keeping both sides weak. So almost immediately, Israel secretly sells supplies and parts to Iran. This helps the Iranian Air Force keep planes in the air. Now, Iran and Israel are not friends, but Israel sees Iraq as a greater threat here. so they're willing to support. Iran needs to get its military organized if they're going to fight this war, so they release military officers that they had jailed during the revolution. War tends to unify a nation, and in this case, the fractured country of Iran is unifying around Iraq's invasion, creating this irony that Saddam is the one who actually cements Khomeini's hold on power. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait also step in here, giving billions of dollars to fund Iraq's war efforts. They want to weaken Iran and turn back its revolution. The Middle East is now dividing between, on one side, Arab states who are ruled by aging Sunni monarchies and strongmen who fear change, and on the other side, a Shia Iran, bent on revolution, on remaking the region in its image. China is also watching this war. They say they will maintain strict neutrality, but they take the opportunity to sell weapons to both sides of the conflict. They eventually become Iran's top supplier of weapons. For most of 1981, the two armies are in a stalemate, with Iraq holding small but important stretches of border territory. The global powers see this stalemate and try to negotiate a ceasefire, hoping that this conflict that threatens so much of the global oil supply will end soon. What they don't know is that this is really just the beginning. Saddam agrees to the ceasefire, but Khomeini does not. This war has become so useful to his goals, unifying the country and keeping the military occupied so that it doesn't become a rival to his power. Khomeini needs the war to continue. So Iran demands that Saddam Hussein step down. They say the war will continue until his rule is ended. Saddam, of course, refuses, so Iran goes on the offensive. Their forces are now organized, their officers have been freed from jail, and they're able to recapture the territory that Saddam had taken, even pushing into Iraq. Saddam's hopes of a quick victory and a gain of some valuable territory are now dead, so he turns to the United States for support, and the US agrees to help. They hope to weaken Iran and its call for anti-American Islamic revolution across the region. So the US starts giving Saddam intelligence and satellite imagery on Iranian troop movement. Iraq also gets another big backer, the Soviet Union. The Soviets are at war in neighboring Afghanistan, trying to suppress another religious uprising. But they also have allies in this region. So over the course of the war, the Soviets become a top supplier of weapons to Iraq. Now remember the situation between these two. It's a tense moment in the Cold War, and the United States and Soviet Union are suddenly supporting the same side of this Middle East conflict, both backing the country that will support the status quo, nothing changing, allowing their great power struggle to continue as it has. But by the summer of 1982, Iran is now pushing into Iraqi territory. Much of their campaign focused on the city of Basra. If Iran can take Basra, it will cut off Iraq from the Persian Gulf, preventing them from shipping out their oil. Iraqi forces are outnumbered here, so they start to dig in and build trenches, erecting barbed wire barriers, planting landmines, and surrounding the city to stop Iran from taking it. The fighting starts to resemble the brutal warfare of World War I, waves of artillery strikes, and the Iranian military resorting to human wave attacks where thousands of boys and men charge over open fields, leading to huge numbers of casualties. Iran is not successful in taking the city, but this attack does weaken Saddam, showing that he's vulnerable. And this is where we need to look to the north, to talk about the Kurds. The Kurds are a minority group in the north of Iraq. They've been long suppressed by Saddam Hussein, and they see this moment as an opportunity to break away from Iraq to make their own country. So Kurdish forces start fighting with the Iraqi army, taking towns and villages. So now Saddam is fighting two different armies, one of which lives in his own country. Iran starts sending support to the Kurds, who have a presence in this mountainous, oil-rich part of Iraq. If the Kurds can hold it and keep Saddam's regime away from all of this oil, it would have a major effect on this war. This is a big deal for Saddam, and he switches tactics to make sure he can control this northern area. He escalates by using chemical weapons against the Kurds as well as the Iranians. Shells filled with mustard gas, weapons that cause extreme burning and blindness, a weapon that is illegal under international law, but even still, the global powers who are supporting him mostly look the other way. The US starts sending technology and money to Saddam, even restoring official diplomatic ties with Iraq. This allows Iraq to buy technology from the United States that helps them develop their weapons programs, including the horrific chemical and biological weapons that he will soon be using on the battlefield. They need him to keep fighting, because this war has changed. It went from protecting Saddam from revolution to now using Saddam to weaken Iran, so they keep supporting him, showing him that he can use chemical weapons without being punished. The chemical attacks help push back Iranian forces, and the war reaches a new stalemate. 1984 is the year that the oil war begins in this conflict. Iraq starts attacking Iranian oil tankers in the Persian Gulf, using new jets provided by France, a new entrant to this conflict. Saddam warns that he'll also attack any ship going into Iranian ports. Iran retaliates by attacking oil tankers carrying Iraq's oil. The oil that the entire globe relies on is now at the center of this increasingly brutal conflict. Hundreds of commercial ships are attacked by both sides, resulting in the death of over 400 civilian sailors. The US has to send in 2 frigates and a guided missile destroyer into the Persian Gulf to escort US ships, hoping that their presence will stop these attacks. Meanwhile, Iran is making progress on the ground, slowly taking territory from Iraq and continuing attacks on the vital port city of Basra. It's 1985 and Saddam is about to escalate to a new extreme. He starts shooting missiles and dropping bombs on Iranian cities all over the country, including the capital. This kills 16,000 people and leaves many homeless. Iran responds, striking Iraqi cities, firing these massive missiles, primarily at the capital of Baghdad. These strikes hit civilian targets like a school and a bus station with hundreds of casualties. Civilians on both sides are now caught in the crossfire of this brutally escalating war. Their cities and their homes are not safe, so many flee. These events leave an entire generation scarred by the trauma of war and a disdain for the outside powers that have ripped their country apart. And speaking of outside powers, this is when the US starts double dealing. They start selling missiles to Iran, which gives Iran an edge against Iraqi forces, who the US is also supporting. Behind all this is President Ronald Reagan, who wants to use the money from this deal to fund an anti-communist militia group in Nicaragua. It's all supposed to be a secret, but will eventually come out and be known as the Iran-Contra scandal. Meanwhile, Kuwait is asking the US to be more aggressive to protect their oil tankers. Iranian attacks on their ships have started to take a toll. The US is getting more involved in the war. Their presence in the Persian Gulf is growing. They start putting American flags on Kuwaiti tankers to deter Iran from attacking them. And then in March of 1988, Iran partners with the Kurdish fighters to take over the Iraqi town of Halabja. The Kurds know that this is going to set Saddam off, and they brace themselves for a brutal retaliation. But what comes next is worse than anyone could have prepared for. The Iraqi army drops bombs and artillery shells containing deadly chemicals, blanketing the entire town with a cloud of deadly gas that sinks into homes and buildings and the underground shelters where many were hiding for protection. It's a brutal attack that kills over 5,000 Iraqi Kurds, mostly unarmed civilians. And it was a part of a broader campaign that Saddam was now waging to wipe out the Kurdish people entirely. He now had what he believed was a justification. So the Iraqi army starts going village to village, dropping chemical weapons on civilians and executing any survivors. This resulted in an estimated 50 to 100,000 deaths in what has now been deemed as a genocide, one of the many war crimes committed by Saddam Hussein. The US knows this is happening, and yet, according to now public documents, the official government line was to turn a blind eye, to blame everything on Iran. Saddam's horrific war crimes project a new fear onto the civilians in Iran, who now worry that a missile loaded with deadly gas could land on their cities. Many flee to take shelter in the mountains. And by now, after 8 years of devastating war, Iran's economy and social order is frayed. Their leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, is feeling the pressure to end this war. More than 1 million lives have been lost in this war. All sides are looking for a way out. and the UN Security Council is pressuring the parties to accept a ceasefire. Then, in July of 1988, a US ship in the Persian Gulf shoots down an Iranian passenger jet, killing all 290 civilians on board. The US shakes it off as an unfortunate accident, saying that they mistook the airliner for a hostile F-16 fighter jet. They pay compensation to the victims' families, and President Reagan sends a letter apologizing. But the government never formally apologizes. And the captain of the ship who did this later received a medal, which fed a deep suspicion in Iran that this attack was deliberate, that it was a scheme to coerce them into accepting peace. Fear of more American attacks, along with a new offensive by Iraq, pushes the Iranian forces to withdraw from the country, and both sides finally accept a ceasefire. The war is finally over, and after all of this, the borders were unchanged from before the fighting. But in some ways, this was really just the first round in a larger conflict that has continued through to today, a war for the future of the Middle East, one that the United States is deeply involved in, but that most expresses itself as a Cold War between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who now fuel civil wars around the region in Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, backing their own proxy fighters and making these conflicts worse. But another major takeaway here is that this war defined Iran's relationship to the rest of the world, especially the United States. Iranian hardliners came to feel confirmed in their belief that they could never trust an outside world bent on Iran's destruction and seemingly unconstrained in their violence, leading some leaders to conclude that only nuclear weapons could stave off disaster from the outside. Saddam Hussein's Iraq emerged battered by this war, humiliated by this failure against Iran. He faced growing internal resistance from his people, which he suppressed with more and more violence. He also came out of this with huge war debts to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Angry that his allies had billed him to fight a war on their behalf, a few years later, Saddam invades Kuwait, seeking its oil, taking the spoils that he felt he was owed. And this is when his one-time backer, the United States, quickly turns against him, expelling him from Kuwait and beating him back in a swift 43-day victory, cutting him off from the world economy and turning him into a pariah, an enemy. A decade after Saddam had gassed his own people, the US finally blamed him for it, turning it into a byword for his cruelty and the centerpiece for their demand that he step down. A few years later, George W. Bush would cite these weapons of mass destructions, the ones that he would never find, as a reason to invade the country, to topple Saddam. Bush's war room was filled with the same officials who had covered for Saddam and his war crimes in the first place, and making it so crystal clear that even though this war between Iran and Iraq ended decades ago, the Middle East we see today is built off of what happened during those 8 brutal years.
We convinced Iraq, using faulty US intelligence, that Iran could not sustain an Iraqi attack, and Saddam Hussein invaded. And we funded, we assisted, we equipped, we supplied the Iraqis. We also supplied the Iranians, but at 4 times market value. We did the Iraqis at market value. We also asked the whole world to stop selling weapons to both sides, and then that allowed our share to increase. Right, isn't that genius? Let's stop the war by helping them run out of weapons. Your weapons. We're gonna keep selling them weapons because we're the United States. We make up our own rules as we go, and that's okay. Because what are you gonna do? We'll just nuke you. So, you know, that's sort of US foreign policy in a nutshell. And we're gonna pretend the whole time that we're making the world a better place until people finally figure out that we're not.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So I would like to thank everyone that was involved with this negotiation.
Reagan comes along and he says, we need to make America great. Not again, just the first time. We need to make it great, period. And that's where he stopped. And I'm that guy. And he came across his grandpa. And we just got out of a humiliating, stunning defeat. Itty-bitty, teeny-weeny little Vietnam had just beaten the snot out of us. And we were reeling from that. And then on top of that, we were reeling from the Iran hostage crisis. And on top of that, we were reeling from the stun of an oil shock in 1979, which came on the heels of an oil shock in 1973. And the country really did feel a little bit bad about itself. And this comes on the heels of the civil rights movement, where a bunch of white people were reassessing their loyalty to the idea that everybody was created equal. And then Reagan comes along, a guy who was careful not to come across as openly racist, but everybody kind of knew. You know what I mean? Like, there was this thing. We now have the recordings of their conversations, like when he calls African leaders monkeys when he's talking to Nixon when he was governor of California. And so we now have the proof of how racist he was. To give you an idea where Reagan was, when the country had turned on apartheid and the American public and the American Congress wanted to put sanctions on apartheid South Africa to try to break apartheid's economy so that they would quit. He refused in the beginning. He wanted nothing to do with it. And he was really clear that he believed that whites should rule blacks. That what South Africa had, where the 5 million whites ruled the 30 million blacks, was actually a really good thing. And what eventually happened was the Republican Party told him, no, this is done. We are turning against apartheid. You are coming with us whether you like it or not. You're the leader of the party. This is how this is going to turn out. And he was dragged kicking and screaming into this. What Reagan did was he codified a shift in American politics that was really dramatic. He villainized the liberal period. The liberal period had gone from 1933 to 1981. He villainized it to the point where he would even say stuff like, oh, I'm not going to say the L word being liberal, because it's dirty. And then he fractured the two political parties, and he said the conservative party is the Republican Party and the liberal party is the Democratic Party.
It's a beautiful scam. It really is. And I actually think there will be people that make this purchase.
And all of a sudden, a bunch of people start to realign politically because they went, oh, wait a minute, I'm in the wrong party. I didn't know that's how it was. And they find themselves walking over to the other party and joining because they're like, well, I'm a liberal and somehow I was a Republican, or I'm a conservative and somehow I was a Democrat. I didn't get the memo.
We'll use plain language. I fear that the United States has already decided that when it is ready, it will create a pretext for a war against Iran. That is what I believe. I acquit the Foreign Secretary of being in that hawkish clan, because insofar as one can penetrate the inscrutable corridors of power and their inhabitants, he seems to be a bit of a dove. But let me say this too, without offence. Britain is a minor player in this game. We've had the debate today as if everything hinged on whether the Prime Minister decided to go to war. The Prime Minister is a minor player in this unfolding tragedy. She decided to go in with the President, maybe because of the transatlantic relationship, the so-called special relationship, as thanks for...
The Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, is at this time on a visit to the USA. She lends her full support to the President's uncompromising response to the Iraqi invasion.
Prime Minister Thatcher and I are looking at it on exactly the same wavelength, concerned about this naked aggression, condemning it, and hoping that a peaceful solution will be found.
The Arab League, too, is swift in its condemnation of Iraq. But the strong leadership necessary for a swift Arab solution to the Iraqi aggression does not materialize. The United States, meanwhile, urges the Saudi and Turkish governments to cut off the pipelines by which Iraq exports the bulk of her oil. Turkey acts quickly, but the Saudi pipeline remains open during the confusion and uncertainty of the next few days. All the time, however, Iraq's hold on Kuwait is being rapidly consolidated by its 100,000-strong invasion force, the spearhead of which are the elite Republican Guard divisions, well equipped with modern armor and artillery, largely supplied, like the Iraqi Air Force, by the Soviet Union, which, through the years of the Cold War, had fostered Iraq as a client state, crucial to its influence in the region. In addition to Soviet-made arms and aircraft, Iraq also possesses over 100 Mirage F-1s, capable of launching Exocet missiles, posing a particular threat to shipping in the Gulf. Iraq's capability to manufacture and deliver chemical weapons had been demonstrated only too clearly by their use against the Kurdish civilian population in the north of the country. And the development by Iraq of long-range variants of the Soviet-made Scud missile raised the possibility of such weapons, armed with chemical warheads, being deployed in Kuwait and threatening the civilian population of Saudi Arabia's northern towns and cities.
I want to see the Arab states join.
August the 5th, 4 days into the invasion. President Bush voices his concern that no positive action had yet been proposed by the Arab nations.
But I am disappointed to find any comment by anyone that apologizes or appears to condone what's taken place.
Mrs. Thatcher, speaking in Aspen, Colorado, underlines the British government's desire for concerted international action against Iraq.
The United Nations members, they must stand up and be counted because a vital principle is at stake. An aggressor must never be allowed to get his way.
The following day, August the 6th, UN Resolution 661 imposes an embargo on all trade with Iraq except for medicine and humanitarian food supplies. The only abstentions come from Cuba and the Republic of Yemen. Iraq's immediate response is an announcement that the bulk of its oil exports will henceforth be routed via the pipeline crossing Saudi Arabia, in a further effort to intimidate King Fahd.
In light of Labour leader Keir Starmer's recent stanning of Maragreat Thatcher, let's take a look at 4 ways the Iron Lady destroyed Britain. 1. Thatcher laid the grounds for the rampant inequality we see today. When she took office, Britain was one of the most equal of wealthy countries. When she resigned, inequality had hit a record high. Thatcher introduced banking deregulation and halved income taxes for the country's wealthiest.
Don't cut down the tall poppies. Let them rather grow tall.
The top 1% of earners accrued more and more wealth.
I've made a fortune, and that's what I want.
At the same time, she slashed benefits. Under her government, wage inequality skyrocketed.
We will bring in a society where public expenditure is cut and where waste of taxpayers' money is ruthlessly expunged.
During her tenure, the percentage of Britons living below the poverty line rose from 13% to 22%. Child poverty more than doubled. As one Labour MP put it, Thatcher's policies caused poverty and deprivation not seen since the Dickensian era. 2. Thatcher presided over a huge wave of privatisation. She rapidly sold off government-run companies at knock-off prices and unleashed the earliest waves of outsourcing on the NHS. Thatcher also sold off the UK's North Sea oil assets in order to pay for tax cuts for higher earners. 3. Thatcher paved the way for today's housing crisis. The 1980 Housing Act invited tenants to purchase their council homes at a discount rate. Since then, over 2 million council houses have been sold off, with less than 5% being replaced. Today, over 1 million households are stuck on social housing waiting lists. Homelessness has hit a record high, and a 2017 study found that 40% of right-to-buy homes are now owned by private landlords. Affordable social housing has turned into unaffordable private rentals. 4. Thatcher decimated workers' rights. Her government wiped out 15% of British industry, as in mining, manufacturing and steel.
She closed all the pits, one by one. Closed them all.
Everybody's lost their houses, they're all in debt. She was looking after the rich. They didn't go for the actual working class bloke.
Unemployment rose to more than 3 million in 1983. Meanwhile, Thatcher sought to crush trade unions. New laws made it harder for workers to strike, and the police brutally suppressed those that did.
The rule of law must prevail over the rule of the mob.
She called us the enemy within.
There were only one enemy within, and that was her.
Trade union membership has been steeply declining since the Thatcher years, meaning less and less workers are protected by collective agreements. As his own MPs have pointed out, Keir Starmer's praise of Margaret Thatcher for setting loose our natural entrepreneurialism failed to account for the inequality, hunger, destitution and misery that resulted from her policies. As one Labour MP warned, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
I'm telling you right now, this is the grossest and cringiest shit anyone has ever seen in a very long time. This isn't cool. It doesn't look cool.
Is it too late to ask what Margaret Thatcher did?
Margaret Thatcher was a terrible Prime Minister, and here's why. Margaret Thatcher introduced a policy called Section 28, and this policy prohibited the promotion of homosexuality in schools and local authorities. This essentially meant that books, schools and classes could not teach about same-sex relationships. The homophobic policy was a massive attack on LGBT+ people and was the biggest step backwards for LGBT+ rights since the decriminalisation of homosexuality in 1967. Alongside this, she essentially ripped up the post-war consensus. Britain was essentially run with the vast majority of public services under public ownership. There was high taxation on the rich to ensure we could fund these services and help millions of people. This idea of people before profit was destroyed with mass privatisation and mass deregulation. She also smashed trade unions, including the miners' strike, and you should also Google the horrific Battle of Orgreave too.
Think she did any good?
Not a bit of good. Not a bit. I put a stake through her heart and garlic round her neck to make sure she never come back.
Isn't that a pretty horrible thing to say when her funeral's going on right now?
Too bad, too bad.
She pulled the ladder up behind herself and never helped another woman, ever.
But didn't she show that a woman could become Prime Minister? Nobody'd done that before.
Do you want a woman like that that's a warmonger and rips the heart out of a country? Is that what you want for a Prime Minister of any sex?
Later in this famous Glasgow bar, punters didn't seem that interested in the funeral coverage. But we found a group of Thatcher fans.
We have just toasted the Prime Minister.
You just toasted her?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Why not?
We put glasses together.
Yes, I liked her. Okay, base rates went up 17% when you had your business went up 21%. But never mind that, I think she deserves a lot of respect, and I think it's a sad day.
Back to our regularly scheduled program.
"4,000 men of the 82nd Airborne Division, and with them F-15 long-range strike aircraft, flying non-stop from their bases in the United States, refueling in flight from tanker aircraft based in Spain and Sicily.
America does not seek conflict, nor do we seek to chart the destiny of other nations. But America will stand by her friends. The mission of our troops is wholly defensive. Hopefully, they will not be needed long. They will not initiate hostilities, but they will defend themselves, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and other friends in the Persian Gulf.
Planning for the possible deployment of British troops in Saudi Arabia is centered on the headquarters of the 1st British Corps in BAOR.
After I talked to the Commander-in-Chief, we in Corps Headquarters did look very carefully to see what we had available in the 1st British Corps at that time. We did a stock check. And then later, at the 7th of August, again after I talked to the Commander-in-Chief, within Corps Headquarters only, we looked at the implications of sending first an armoured division, secondly an armoured division minus, an armoured division consisting of 2 brigades, and also of an armoured brigade. However, we still didn't have any clear direction about what was required. We again, having looked at those 3 options, looked at a number of others, for instance a medium reconnaissance brigade, an artillery brigade, an aviation regiment, so that if we were going to be suddenly asked to send something, we knew exactly what we could and couldn't do.
In fact, when it comes, the British government's initial response stops short of sending ground troops.
I've given instructions today for one squadron of Tornado air defense fighters to move shortly to assist with the air defense of Saudi Arabia. This squadron is already in Cyprus, and together with its necessary air transport and tanker support, will move forward to Saudi Arabia as soon as possible.
Within 24 hours, tactical communications are established in Riyadh for the British contribution to the defense of Saudi Arabia, codenamed Operation Granby. Crucial to the political credibility of the coalition now rapidly taking shape is the decision on August the 10th at the Arab League summit in Cairo, in which 12 member states, including both Egypt and Syria, vote to send military forces in support of Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, just 2 hours after their arrival at Dhahran from Cyprus on the 11th of August, RAF Tornadoes are participating in combat air patrols with the United States Air Force. And within a further 48 hours, a squadron of ground attack Jaguars with VC-10K tanker support is operational at Thumrait Air Base in Oman.
We went out there in a very uncertain situation, and we really didn't know whether we'd be going to war the next day. So most important that we had to put up that air defense guard. And of course it was backed up under the Saudi ground environment, the ground radars and everything else. But also, of course, AWACS was there 24 hours a day. I was responsible for negotiating firstly with the Americans and then with the Saudis to come up with a command and control arrangement that would stand the test, obviously, of both the lead-in to any war and, of course, war itself. And we quite clearly identified the benefits of going under American command because of our common training, common equipment and everything else. And basically it was an American show and it was American infrastructure and so on. Because it was desperately important during this stage that we didn't have an accidental shooting down of Iraqi aircraft. That, of course, could precipitate a conflict. For years, we've been dealing with a European enemy that operated very discreet Soviet-type aircraft. Here, we are operating against an enemy that had both French and Western and other aircraft as well as Soviet. So we had a tremendous problem in this identification area. But happily, we didn't shoot any aircraft down.
Throughout August, the coalition forces steadily grow and take on a truly multinational character. In terms of manpower and equipment, however, it is the military might of the United States that underwrites the credibility of Operation Desert Shield. By the third week of August, American ground forces are arriving in Saudi Arabia at the rate of 1,000 per day. The build-up of coalition forces is given added momentum by continuing Iraqi intransigence. On August the 15th, Saddam Hussein sues for peace with Iran, acceding to all Iranian claims arising out of the enormously costly and inconclusive 8-year Iran-Iraq war, thus reducing his military commitment on his eastern border. Fears for the safety of Western nationals held in Kuwait and Iraq deepen as the Iraqi regime announces its human shield policy of dispersing foreigners to key military and industrial sites throughout Iraq.
But when Saddam Hussein specifically offers to trade the freedom of those citizens of many nations he holds against their will in return for concessions, there can be little doubt that whatever these innocent people are called, they are in fact hostages.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but the price, we think the price is worth it.
As General de la Billière takes command and troops of 7 Brigade begin departing for the Gulf, the UN Security Council agrees Resolution 670, imposing an air embargo on Iraq. This enables further international action to be taken to deny Iraq the means to sidestep UN sanctions by importing spare parts and other strategic supplies by air. The latest in a growing list of Security Council resolutions demonstrating the resolve of the international community not to allow Iraqi aggression to succeed.
The planning in Saudi Arabia in those early days was really under Saudi overall control, but American detailed guidance. I think that would be the right way to put it. And the plans were very simple. They were to defend Saudi Arabia. There were no complexities about how we were going to carry out an attack, or not very much about combining the plans of the Navy, the Air Force and the Army at that stage, because we were waiting for an initiative from the Iraqis and not taking the initiative ourselves. So it was purely straightforward, simple, defensive operation. And this was brought about by me being involved with Norman Schwarzkopf in daily discussions and briefings. As far as the RAF was concerned, they were working, as is normal in air operations, under the central control of the Americans, who were the largest users, Air Force-wise, and their operations were coordinated by them. And as far as the Navy is concerned, at that stage, not very much changed.
We and the American Navy in the Gulf had for a long time had a close working relationship, but in no time during my tenure of office was I under any American command. We had very close liaison with the Americans, and I offered my forces to the Americans in support of various board and search operations to do with the embargo. But this was done by mutual agreement and not by any delegation of authority. And we had good relations too with the small but quite potent Gulf navies. But we were aware that other navies were on their way. The French were there almost as soon as we were. The Canadians, the Australians, the Dutch, they were all coming. And we heard rumblings that from further afield, such as Argentina, naval forces were coming as well. So getting those forces to present a cohesive and united front, outwardly at least, was very important, and was an important part of our political resolve in those early days.
On arrival in Al Jubail, I found myself with a lot of eager soldiers, nowhere to live and operate from, and initially no equipment to carry out any tasks. The biggest problem for us on arrival in Al Jubail was to assess the many tasks we'd been given, allocate manpower and indeed vehicles as they began to arrive across the jetty. I had been sent there initially to receive my vehicles and then assist with the outload of the ships coming into the port, but I was also given the responsibility of running reception, the reception of 7 Brigade group through the port of Al Jubail. To my surprise, also, we were given the responsibility to run the 2,000-man tented camp, which eventually became affectionately known as Baldrick Lines. That in itself was a massive task. The tented camp wasn't completed by the time we got there. There was no infrastructure, no facilities, and therefore I had to detach a large element of the regiment, the quartermaster's department essentially, to running the tented camp and setting it up for 2,000 men. All the while, of course, equipment was arriving on the jetty. 7 Brigade were arriving day and night into the sheds, and we had all that to cope with. As my vehicles arrived, we organised them into sections, troops and squadrons, and began the task of moving equipment away from the dockside.
There's a feeling of excitement buzzing around, which I'm sure you can feel. The boys in the sheds woke up this morning with a purpose, going to get the kit unloaded, and really looking forward to getting out into the desert and working alongside the American Marines. It's very exciting.
We took over a dockside warehouse, which was just a huge building about the size of a football field, and we set up in there to carry out a modification program on the Challenger tanks. We were also doing some modification work on the Warriors, but we did those outside on the quayside itself. There was a problem with the air filtration system of the Challenger tanks, which was known about in Germany, but because the conditions were such, it wasn't dusty and sandy, except on Saltau, we could get away with it and there was no urgency for the modifications to be fitted. In the desert, sand would become a real problem, and therefore it was vital that that modification was fitted. We were under great pressure. We had to do a squadron a day. Initially, each tank took us 18 hours, and therefore to produce 16 or 17 tanks, which we were doing, we were under great time pressure. We started at 7 in the morning, and the first day we'd actually finished at about 3 in the morning, ready for the next lot to come in at 7 that same morning.
The setting up of the Jabir range, where we had chosen to do our fire manoeuvre, to make certain, first of all, the guns were firing correctly, and then to do the absolutely essential training that was going to get us ready for war, was a very complicated business. I got heavily involved in this because when you're dealing with the Emir of Al-Jubail, for instance, the Israeli commander has got to go and see him. And so the first thing that was necessary was to get the Emir's permission to move Bedouin settlements from off the area that we've been given to do this manoeuvring in. And he was extremely cooperative. Then, with his staff, we sent our own staff out to ask the Bedouins to move, and then to move their camel herds off what was clearly prime camel grazing area. Now, that, of course, wasn't the end of it, because we then had to mark and survey the entire range in, which was a complicated performance. But having marked it, we then had to patrol the borders each day before we fired. But again, once you've done that, and remembering that there were patrolling aircraft overhead the whole time, there were hundreds of sorties going up towards the Kuwaiti border from Dhahran and Al-Jubail, that airspace above the range had to be cleared.
We were in opposition to the Americans in a way at that stage, because they were setting up really what I would call just straightforward gallery-type ranges for tanks and artillery, at which they merely fired their weapons. We wanted a very different approach. We wanted a live firing range with movement up to squadron, indeed two-squadron level. So we had a bit of a problem getting that idea over to the Americans and getting our range cleared. But we did manage it eventually, and our first round went down the range at about 8:30 on the 2nd of November.
I'm not happy. I hate it here. I want to go home.
My name is Nayirah, and I just came out of Kuwait. They took the babies out of the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
President Bush repeated the incubator story at least 10 times.
Babies pulled from incubators and scattered like firewood across the floor.
Of all of the things in the world that have never happened, that has never happened the most. That is the most didn't happen shit of all time.
She was no ordinary witness. She's a member of the Kuwaiti royal family. Then, a rather embarrassed Amnesty retracted its report.
Credible medical opinion was that this didn't happen.
Just in, a recent study has proven that 100% of me doesn't give a fuck.
Saddam Hussein is gonna regret pulling this sorry shit. We're gonna kick some Iraqi ass! What did you say? We're gonna kick some Iraqi ass! Oh, hell, son!
Withdraw from Kuwait or face a coalition ready and willing to employ all means necessary. Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Five months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined. Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny. We share in their joy, a joy tempered only by our compassion for their ordeal. Tonight, the Kuwaiti flag once again flies above the capital of a free and sovereign nation. I am pleased to announce that at midnight tonight, Eastern Standard Time, exactly 100 hours since ground operations commenced and 6 weeks since the start of Operation Desert Storm, all United States and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations. It is up to Iraq whether this suspension on the part of the coalition becomes a permanent ceasefire. At every opportunity, I have said to the people of Iraq that our quarrel was not with them, but instead with their leadership, and above all with Saddam Hussein. This remains the case. You, the people of Iraq, are not our enemy. We do not seek your destruction. We have treated your POWs with kindness. Coalition forces fought this war only as a last resort and look forward to the day when Iraq is led by people prepared to live in peace with their neighbors.
It starts in 1996 with Netanyahu, who wrote a book called Fighting Terrorism. And the thesis of the book is quite straightforward and very dangerous. He says, you know, there's Hamas, there's Hezbollah, they oppose Israel. It's not good for us to fight them directly. That won't work. What we need to do is topple the governments that back them. So what we need is regime change throughout the Middle East. And he actually gave a long list of 7 countries that included Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, and Lebanon. And systematically, the United States has done Netanyahu's bidding for almost 30 years now, going to war with every one of them except for the big one that Netanyahu so much longs for, which is the war directly between the United States and Iran.
At the end of the first Gulf War, the Israelis made a decision that the greatest threat to them was Iraq. Saddam Hussein, because he had fired 48 missiles into their country, and they believed he was keeping missiles, or he had the potential to reconstitute missiles with chemical weapons, and Israel could not accept that. So from 1991 to 1993, they practiced to assassinate Saddam, who they viewed as an irrational character who had to be removed. And they actually came very close to assassinating him. They had his uncle Kharala had died. There was going to be a funeral in the fall of 1993. Or 1992, 1993, around, I think 92 perhaps. And the Israelis had actually sent commando teams into Iraq to reconnaissance this place. They had the whole assassination lined up. They did their last second rehearsal before the troops went off to kill Saddam, and a mistake happened. They fired a live rocket when they should have not, and they killed some soldiers, and it got bad press, and suddenly you couldn't assassinate Saddam anymore. But this opened a window where the Israelis were like, well, what do we do? And so enter me and some others, and we came in and said, hey, why don't you work with us to eliminate the threat of weapons of mass destruction and buy into the notion that Iraq can be contained if it doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, that Saddam can be part of the family of nations as long as he can't threaten you with weapons of mass destruction. This required Israel to go through a very major rethink. I worked with the colonel whose job was to be Saddam Hussein, and spent hours talking to him about the reality of the Iraqi regime, how it functioned. He knew a lot. I knew a lot. We just started working. And then they started to see how the Iraqis were responding to the inspections, and the notion that Iraq could be disarmed was raised. And the Israelis changed their position. By 1998, when I left, they had decided that Iraq could be disarmed, and that if Iraq was disarmed, that Iraq no longer posed a threat. They also changed their mind about Saddam Hussein, saying he's a rational actor, and as long as he can be engaged economically, etc.
Outcome of war. This can happen, but it is not terrorism, because what terrorists do is target the innocent deliberately, and therefore my definition of terrorism is the systematic and deliberate attack, the murder, maiming, and menacing of innocents, of civilians, for political goals. I think that you can tell a lot about terrorists, but what happens when they come to power? Those who fight for freedom and come to power do not impose terrorism. Those who do, who fight in terroristic means, end up as being masters of terrorist states.
Oh, he's kind of cute. He's a murderer.
It's kind of cute.
I have a Zionist friend who keeps saying, well, the Arabs could, well, how much land were the Arabs giving? Why can't the Arabs be generous? My immediate response is, well, why wasn't the United States generous? Why not New York and Connecticut or something? You know, or New Mexico and Arizona, which were actually asked for. The Zionist movement at one point asked the United States if it would be willing to give up Arizona and New Mexico and create a Jewish state. And the United States said no. But we're willing to let you do it in Palestine. So like we're willing to be generous with other people's stuff, but not our own. And that's the thing that I don't get about the United States in our policy towards Israel. Okay, if it's such a good idea, why don't we do it here? Let's give the Israelis a homeland here that'll be Jewish only, and if you're not Jewish, you have to get out. And when you put it in those terms, suddenly it becomes maybe not so desirable. And then the other question is, Palestine obviously had nothing to do with the Holocaust. We're obviously doing this in part because of the Holocaust. Well, why don't we put it in Germany then? Why didn't we carve off a chunk of northern Germany and call it New Israel? Hamburg could have become New Jerusalem and just give them northern Germany, right? That only seems fair, especially since most of the Jews that we're talking about were either American Jews, and most of them were of German descent, or they were European Jews, and most of them were of German descent.
I was intimately involved in the planning for the Iraq War as the executive assistant. You know, the bottom line was the White House didn't care if there were weapons of mass destruction. That was a lovely fig leaf to have. But whether there were or there weren't, the invasion was going forward. On my first day as the executive assistant, I went into the office. I said to the deputy director, I go, so, what are we doing? And he says, I actually can't tell you until you sign your secrecy agreement. So go down to the 6th floor. Security's got some agreements for you to sign. So I went down there. And I walked in, they had 6 secrecy agreements laid out for me, and I signed each one of the 6. And I said, so, what's up? And the guy goes, well, next year we're going to invade Iraq. We're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein. And we're going to create the world's largest Air Force base, so that we can move all of our air assets out of Saudi Arabia and deprive Osama Bin Laden of the ability to say that we were polluting the land of the 2 holy mosques. I said, but we haven't caught Bin Laden yet. And he said, buddy, the battle lines have already been drawn and the decision's been made. He said, the pro-invasion groups are OVP, Office of the Vice President, OSD, Office of the Secretary of Defense, and NSC. He said the anti-invasion are State Department, CIA, and Joint Chiefs, but we don't get to make those decisions.
Yeah. Wow.
And certainly the Israelis were begging us to overthrow Saddam Hussein at every opportunity, in every meeting in Washington. They would beg us to attack Iraq, just like they've been begging us to attack Iran for the last 20 years. This was a decision made by Dick Cheney and imposed on everybody in the community. CIA is sending these intelligence reports to not just the White House, but to the whole community, saying, we can't find any weapons of mass destruction. And so what Cheney did was he mandated the creation of an intelligence unit inside the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and they recruited
the military
a guy by the name of Chalabi and his minions to just manufacture false intelligence, saying there's WMD all over Iraq, and the only thing we can do to stop it is to invade the country. And then we're like, we're not seeing any of this intel. Where is this stuff coming from? We want to talk to these sources. We want to polygraph these sources. Nope, not available. And so the decision was made. There was nothing anybody could do about it.
Kanan Makia has been involved for over 10 years with an Iraqi exile opposition group dedicated to the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. We followed him to their new Baghdad headquarters. The Iraqi National Congress was founded in 1992. The INC is headed by a former banker, Ahmed Chalabi. Before the war, Chalabi was a key player in efforts to help establish the case that Saddam was an imminent threat.
Saddam Hussein was a threat to the West, and he was the most dangerous threat that could have been envisaged in this time, especially after September 11.
But they were set up by the INC.
According to top Pentagon advisor Richard Pearl, Chalabi was without question the single most important source of intelligence the U.S. had on Saddam Hussein's Iraq.
He's a very capable guy. He's quite brilliant, PhD in mathematics, with a background at the University of Chicago and MIT, committed to secular democracy, and is the kind of modern liberal leader that we would hope to see not only in Iraq but throughout the Arab world.
People say that there are two men who are responsible for the fall of Saddam Hussein. One is George Bush and the other is Ahmed Chalabi. You agree?
If somebody else said it, I'm not going to disagree with them. This is.
Well, you nagged the U.S. government for 12, 13 years to accomplish this task.
Well, I did. I worked very hard because I came to the conclusion very early on that if the U.S. is not heavily involved in helping the Iraqi people get rid of Saddam, Saddam is going to stay and his son is going to come after him.
Many people that supported the war no longer do.
Yes.
They feel that they were suckered.
Yes, probably.
They say so.
Okay. I mean, I'm not disputing.
Well, I mean, half the people now feel that the war wasn't justified on the grounds that it was argued for.
Okay.
Do you feel any discomfort with that?
No. We are in Baghdad now.
Ever since the end of the Gulf War, a small group of influential policymakers has wanted to rid the Middle East of Saddam Hussein. But going to war to achieve it was not politically feasible until after September 11th, 2001. On the afternoon of September 11th, Richard Pearl phoned one of President Bush's speechwriters, David Frum.
I had a conversation with David.
And what was the content of that?
That we are not going to deal effectively with global terrorism if states can support and sponsor and harbor terrorists without penalty.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts.
At 8:30 that evening, President Bush spoke to the nation. He laid out his policy, echoing the words that Pearl had suggested to his speechwriter earlier in the day.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them.
4 days later, the president and his cabinet gathered at Camp David to formulate strategy in the war on terrorism. President Bush told cabinet members that if Saddam Hussein was to become a target, they needed to dig up evidence that he was cooperating with al-Qaeda. Within days, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz directed one of his deputies, Douglas Feith, to set up a special office inside the Pentagon that would examine intelligence regarding Iraq's possible connection with al-Qaeda. It started as a small, secretive operation.
It was very simple. It was clear that no one had been looking for links of a kind that it was reasonable to consider might exist. We didn't know whether they existed, and the evidence might have been that they didn't exist. So some people were brought in to take a look, and within a very short period of time, they began to find links that nobody else had previously understood.
When it came to Iraq, the Special Intelligence Office didn't trust what the CIA or even their own Defense Intelligence Agency had to say. They did apparently listen to Ahmed Chalabi. According to one Pentagon source, he visited once every other month. Across the Potomac, Greg Thielman had analyzed intelligence for the State Department for 7 years.
That office was largely invisible to us in the intelligence community because they didn't play in the normal bureaucratic process of making intelligence assessments and reporting on those assessments.
What did you understand that office to be about?
I'm still trying to figure out what that office was about. The office wasn't big enough for them to really have the expertise in-house, and the mere creation of the office was odd since the Secretary of Defense had the entire Defense Intelligence Agency at his disposal. So it's a little mysterious what exactly they were doing.
Let me be blunt about this. The level of competence of the Central Intelligence Agency in this area is appalling. They had filtered out the whole set of possibilities because it was inconsistent with their model. So if you're walking down the street and you're not looking for hidden treasure, you won't find it.
Conversely, if you look for something, you will find it, simply because you are looking, and the nature of intelligence is very often vague, and things can be interpreted one way or another.
Of course, there's no absolute truth in this.
It is not publicly known what intelligence was provided by the Special Intelligence Office. But Frontline has learned that a report from the Czech Republic that 9/11 hijacker Mohammed Atta met with an Iraqi intelligence officer in Prague got their attention and was passed on to the White House.
Was that report that has been pretty well confirmed, that he did go to Prague and he did meet with a senior official of the Iraqi intelligence service in Czechoslovakia last April, several months before the attack.
But the meeting in Prague was never confirmed. In fact, the FBI established 1 month later through car rental records that Atta was in Florida when the alleged Prague meeting would have occurred. The vice president, however, would still be citing the story over a year later.
On at least one occasion, we have reporting that places him in Prague with a senior Iraqi intelligence official a few months before the attack on the World Trade Center.
I think it's very unusual the amount of influence they had. What seems to have happened is that the conclusions or the work that they did somehow entered from the side into the policy community.
At a very high level.
At a very high level, in a way that was invisible to those of us in the intelligence community producing intelligence.
He can never be part of any solution.
Chalabi turned back to Washington. With the help of friends in Congress, he lobbied for the passage of a bill, the Iraqi Liberation Act, that would make regime change in Iraq official U.S. government policy.
The Iraqi people know full well the horror of chemical and biological weapons.
The Iraqi Liberation Act funneled millions of dollars to the INC.
The Iraqi National Congress asked your help in removing the threat of Saddam's doomsday weapons from our people, from the region, and from the world.
Chalabi used some of the money to attract and pay defectors. He then passed them to the government as well as to the media. Many news organizations, including Frontline, used Chalabi's defectors in their reports. We talked to Chalabi at INC headquarters in Baghdad.
You had argued for a long time that they were tightly connected with al-Qaeda. As far back as '98, I remember meeting with you, and you told me that there were lots of connections.
Yes, there were.
Well, those have not quite been demonstrated.
We have very strong leads on that, and we have very strong evidence that they have.
You have strong evidence that there's links between al-Qaeda
you see, the
and,
point
and
is
Saddam
that
Hussein.
U.S.
Where are these? Where is this evidence, though?
In U.S. hands. We gave the names of the people. There were visits of al-Qaeda here, and there was money that changed hands.
Do you have any documentary evidence of any kind?
Yes, there is such a document.
And that is a document that you could show us?
Well, I've seen it, but I don't have it in my possession. They could show it to you, I think.
Who can show it to me?
Our intelligence people.
Your intelligence people? So after this interview, we can...
I don't know if you can do it right now.
Well, I mean, I think it's very important to make this... This is something you've talked about since '98, and I think it's a very important point. It's one of the points that drew America to this war.
Yes.
Correct? So it's very important to establish the truth of it.
Yes.
So
I agree.
If there is such a document, it makes sense for you to share it, no?
I'm not saying no. I'm saying that I can't,
I'm somehow not getting the feeling that I'm going to see the document.
Well, you are erroneous.
Okay, great. I hope to see it.
Well, we expect to show it to you.
The document was supposed to demonstrate money changing hands between Saddam Hussein's government and al-Qaeda. After repeated requests, Frontline has still not seen the document.
If your analysis is not correct, then we're not treated as liberators but as conquerors, and the Iraqis begin to resist, particularly in Baghdad. Do you think the American people are prepared?
Another assumption was that Iraqis would greet the Americans as liberators, an assurance they got from the INC.
I really do believe we will be greeted as liberators. I've talked with a lot of Iraqis in the last several months myself, had them to the White House. The President and I have met with them, with various groups and individuals, people who've devoted their lives from the outside to trying to change things inside Iraq. Men like Kanan Makia, who's a professor at Brandeis, but an Iraqi, he's written great books about the subject, knows the country intimately, is a part of the democratic opposition and resistance. The read we get on the people of Iraq is there's no question but what they want to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and they will welcome as liberators the United States when we come to do that.
While the administration was listening to Makia, they were ignoring the warnings of others. In February 2003, Richard Pearl invited an expert in post-war situations to make a presentation at the Pentagon. This expert warned about the potential for post-war violence.
The thrust of it was that it was very likely that in a post-conflict situation in Iraq, there was going to be a lot of violence. You're going to have a period of general lawlessness. You're going to need to establish the rule of law. You're going to have to deal with prisoners, for example.
Today, everywhere in Africa, everywhere in the world, the West is bombing democracy into our people and destroying what used to be paradise. They come with sanctions and injunctions. You do this or we sanction you. You do this or we bomb you, and so on. The West insists that if you want to deal with them, you need to have a certain kind of government. They even go to the extent of determining who should be our leaders, even today.
Back to our regularly scheduled program.
On December 13, 2000, Vice President Al Gore formally conceded to George W. Bush. This followed a contentious election that included recount battles in Florida and a pivotal Supreme Court ruling in Bush v. Gore, deciding the presidency in Bush's favor. Florida's 25 electoral votes became the deciding factor. Controversies over recount methods, hanging chads, and voting irregularities dominated headlines. These disputes led to a national debate over the reliability of election systems and voter intent in critical battleground states. The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, halted Florida's manual recounts, citing unequal vote counting standards. This effectively awarded the presidency to George W. Bush, with the court's decision sparking debates over judicial impartiality and election fairness. In his concession speech, Gore acknowledged, "I accept the decision of the court, not because it is right, but because it is final." He called for unity, urging Americans to respect the outcome for the sake of democracy and national stability.
People have been debating what the world would have looked like had Al Gore won the presidency in 2000.
And I would argue that Bush defeating Gore with the help of the Supreme Court basically is a watershed moment in American history. The world turns out completely different if Gore wins. As for 9/11, there was an article in Newsweek not too long after 9/11 about Richard Clarke. Richard Clarke was President Clinton's terrorism czar, and they had created a plan to attack al-Qaeda. However, Clinton didn't feel like it was a good idea to start this right before the new administration was coming in. So when Richard Clarke gave this plan to the Bush administration, they ignored it. Bush's big thing was missile defense against China. He was basically trying to recreate the Cold War using China as the enemy. And I point out to the SP-3 spy plane incident, for example, one of the things which was blown way out of proportion by Bush. So if the Clinton plan to attack al-Qaeda goes through under Gore, then 9/11 doesn't happen. If 9/11 doesn't happen, then American troops don't get bogged down in Afghanistan and later Iraq, which was totally a Bush pet project. I would say more important than that is tax policy, because Bush's tax cuts for the rich explode the budget deficit and create immense national debt. All of this extra liquidity these rich people are putting into the stock market, they're putting into real estate and ballooning the real estate market. It's creating the real estate bubble, and that creates the 2007 recession. Now that said, the dot-com bubble bursting, causing a recession, probably means that Al Gore would not get reelected. So all bets are off for 2004.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
So backtrack just a little bit, because you need to know a piece of information. So the 2000 election was botched. The reason the 2000 election was botched was in November 2000, while the election results are coming in, Florida got put into the Gore column. And then as the night went on, it got put back into the neutral column, and then sometime in the morning on Wednesday, it got put into the Bush column. Now that can happen. The news agencies made a mistake and they shouldn't have called Florida when they did. That's a possibility. There's no two ways about it. The reason the news agencies called Florida the way they did was because of exit polls. So exit polls are, you've voted, you're walking out of the voting booth, you're now in that zone, right? There's that zone where nobody can talk to you about politics. You walk past that zone, there's a sign there. It says, right, no more politics past this point. You walk past that sign and there's a grad student. They're skinny because they live on top ramen, and they've got a pencil and paper, and they're like, can I ask you a question? The reason they stopped you is because they have to count to 7. So they're like, oh, you, okay. And then they go, can you answer a question? Half the people will say, go to hell, and the other half the people will be like, I can't wait to answer. And then they ask you questions like, whom did you vote for? And then maybe some demographic information, and then you carry on in your way, and then they come back and they report this. And when they report this, they're crazy reliable. It is very, 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 very rare that exit polls are wrong. And so we've come to rely on exit polls because it's a fast way to figure out how a state voted. And then we can go from there. The problem was, there was this guy, Greg Palast. He was a journalist. They're so obnoxious. And what he was doing was he was recording all the irregularities in the Florida election and then trying to report them before Gore surrendered, because Gore refused to surrender because there were so many irregularities in Florida, he wanted a recount. He went to the Florida Supreme Court. The Florida Supreme Court overwhelmingly voted he had the right to a recount. George Bush Jr., because he's about states' rights, appealed the ruling to the United States Supreme Court. Anyway, that seems like a contradiction. And the United States Supreme Court, in a totally partisan way, 5 conservatives versus 4 liberals, said the following thing. Gore had asked for 3 counties to be recounted, not the whole state. The Supreme Court said it'll take too long. Besides, who would pay for it? And then they said, and it's not fair you recount 3 counties, you should do the whole state. By the way, that part I totally agree with. Who will pay for it? I have an idea. Why don't you make the Bush and Gore campaigns pay for it? They want to be president so bad. They've got coffers. They're sitting on top of money from donors. Make them pay for it. Or, here's an idea. Why doesn't the United States of America pay for it? I mean, isn't it important that we get our elections right? And why don't we recount the whole state? The Supreme Court can literally do anything in a ruling. They could completely ignore the case that was before them and rule on some random other thing, as we just found out this summer in June about 6 times. So why didn't they just rule, we're mandating that you recount the whole state and then tell us who is going to pay for it, instead of asking us questions like there's Socrates or something, trying to figure out some philosophical problem. In the meantime, Greg Palast shows us all these crazy things that have happened in Florida, and it looks like there was a lot of over-the-top, good old-fashioned Southern vote interference and vote irregularity. And so now George Bush Jr. has won the presidency with a 500,000 vote deficit. He wins the Electoral College, but lost the popular vote. And the Democrats as a whole don't believe he legitimately won Florida because of the signs of cheating. So when Gore finally does surrender in December, a month late, he finally says, okay, Supreme Court has ruled, Gore v. Bush. I finished, I quit. He gets up in front of the country and he tells everybody, please don't riot. No protests. For God's sakes, don't attack the United States Capitol. We're going to have a peaceful transition because no matter what, even if the election is messed up, what is more important than that is that we have the peaceful transition of government so that the democracy stays intact. And we didn't protest. We listened to Gore. It was crazy because there were a lot of angry folk that had felt like the election had been stolen. And for the record, the evidence points to, at least in Florida, the election was stolen. In part because they did eventually do a recount. And in the recount, Gore won. If they had just recounted the state, Gore won. So I think it was like 2 years ago, Gore was he was being interviewed by somebody. I think it's one of those late night sitcom, not sitcom, comedy. I don't even know. I don't pay enough attention. And they asked him, you know, what would have happened if you had won the 2000 election? And Gore said, I did win the 2000 election. Because he did. It turns out. How embarrassingly wonky is that? Gore surrenders. I turned to my wife and I said, George Bush Jr. will attack Iraq right now. She goes, what? Where did this come from? And I go, he's an illegitimate president. Everybody knows it. He has to make himself legitimate. The only way to make yourself legitimate in this moment is start a war. There's nobody in worse shape than Iraq. Because by that point, we had imposed catastrophic, brutal, cruel, inhumane crimes against humanity sanctions on Iraq. Sanctions that that made what we did to apartheid South Africa look like a joke. We cut off their food. We never cut off South Africa's food. We cut off their medicine. Who cuts off the medicine? We were going to grind Iraq into the dirt. And we're going to do it by literally strangling them and starving them. Madeline Albright, Secretary of State for Bill Clinton. This is before she becomes Secretary of State. She was already in the Bill Clinton administration. She's interviewed by 60 Minutes. There are like 4 years, I think it was, I want to say it was 96. Don't quote me on the year, it might have been 95. I recently wrote something about this and I can't remember the year. She's being interviewed on 60 Minutes, and I think it was Leslie Stahl. Leslie Stahl says, according to the UN, 800,000 Iraqis have already died because of the sanctions. So the sanctions have already been in effect for 5 years. 800,000. It's more than 100,000 a year. And then Leslie Stahl says, and according to the UN, 500,000 are age 5 and under. We'd literally killed 500,000 babies already. Why? Because they invaded Kuwait? What were we gaining from putting these sanctions, these cruel, sadistic sanctions on Iraq? You're trying to get rid of Saddam Hussein by starving people to death? What are you doing? You're crippling the economy? How's that going to get rid of a tyrant? That makes the tyrant stronger. People are going to rally around the tyrant because now they're thinking, well, we have to fight for this guy because you're killing us. Now we want vengeance. Now we have to defend the state against this foreign force that's doing this thing. And so Leslie Stahl goes, is it worth it? And Madeline Albright goes, I wouldn't do it differently if I had to do it over again. It's ruthless. Instead of saying, yeah, this is clearly a big mistake.
Theory that you probably don't know is going to blow your mind?
Let's do it.
The day before 9/11, the day before the attacks, Rumsfeld gave a press conference where he talked about trillions of dollars missing. The day. Then a plane slams into the very part of the building where they were doing the accounting, blows up half the fucking building in the Pentagon, blows up a wall. Donald Rumsfeld was on, where was it, the White House lawn?
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3.
Okay, now, again, somebody told you that literally, like right before 9/11 happened, they said they couldn't track $2.3 trillion. No, that didn't happen. That did not happen, but it did happen.
What the fuck?
Yeah, so think about what Kennedy said. Think about what you saw when you saw that Vice movie, where Dick Cheney, who was the CEO of Halliburton, becomes a vice president and gets billions of dollars in no-bid contracts. Now think about what we just saw with Donald Rumsfeld saying they couldn't find $2.3 trillion. I don't know where it went. I don't know. It seems like we should have had it. So, like, we'll keep looking. Oh no, the spot where we looked just blew up.
Oh my god. What the
Find out
hell?
if that's true. If it was the accounting office, because this is what I love to say it because it sounds good, but let's make sure it's true that part blew up. But either way, that he did say that, and then they did get hit by a plane a couple of days later.
It's unbelievable.
It's so crazy. And no one talks about that $1 trillion.
Pentagon. The day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. To understand how the Pentagon can lose track of trillions, consider the case of one military accountant who tried to find out what happened to a mere $300 million.
We know it's gone, but we don't know what they spent it on.
Jim Minery, a former Marine turned whistleblower, is risking his job by speaking out for the first time about the millions he noticed were missing from one defense agency's balance sheets. Minery tried to follow the money trail, even crisscrossing the country looking for records.
The director looked at me and he says, "Why do you care about this stuff?" It took me aback, you know. My supervisor asked me why I care about doing a good job. So.
He was reassigned and says officials then covered up the problem by just writing it off.
They got to cover it up. That's where the corruption comes in. They've got to cover up the fact that they can't do the job.
The Pentagon's Inspector General partially substantiated several of Minery's allegations, but could not prove officials tried to manipulate the financial statements. 20 years ago, Pentagon employee Franklin C. Spinney made headlines exposing what he calls the accounting games. He's still there, and although he does not speak for the Pentagon, he believes the problem has gotten worse.
Those numbers are pie in the sky. The books are cooked routinely year after year after year.
Retired Vice Admiral Jack Shanahan commanded the Navy's Second Fleet the first time Donald Rumsfeld served as Defense Secretary.
With good financial oversight, we could find $48 billion in loose change in that building without having to hit the taxpayers.
In the 2.5 minutes since this report began,
well, there's two things that solve every problem: money and explosives. I've got an idea!
It's just unbelievable when you look back at everything they told. Astounding. And then the things that they ignored that happened that day, and the presence of the Mossad that was there, and they just never really answered the question. And just
Tower 7?
Tower 7 was very clearly just dropped to the, come on.
You cannot explain that away.
I mean, and then when you learn even more, which I didn't even show on the show, about the art students that were there, that were also intelligence
Israeli
agents.
art students, and
And
then
the weeks leading up, just like,
it's
what
a coincidence.
What a coincidence.
And I did some research on plane crashes, as I'm sure many of your viewers have. And every single plane crash, especially a large aircraft, there's always wreckage left of the parts that can't be blown apart. The landing gear and the engines specifically. A lot of times the nose cone. Well, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, no wreckage whatsoever. The Pentagon, there were no engines. There were none of the landing gear. Nothing.
And yet there were servicemen around that said, I've served in active military. It was a missile. I can tell you the sound of a missile. And they ignored all of this. And then we even pulled an old clip of a CNN journalist who was on the ground that day and said, I got up close, there's no plane. And they just kind of tried to wipe this from the internet.
Yeah.
I was standing in front of the Pentagon that night, seeing one of our fortresses pried open by a missile airplane. thinking about the number of people that probably died on the plane and on the ground.
In the middle of all of this, though, something else is going on. And that other thing is maybe even more important for the purposes of this talk than what I've been talking about up until now. But I needed to make sure I had the background laid out properly so you can set this. There are a group of people in the United States who just can't comprehend 9/11. They can't put it into their heads. It's caused madness for them. And they're trying to figure this out. At one point, somebody decides there's a laser cannon in outer space, and it shot the World Trade Center from space. Another conspiracy is a missile was launched into the Pentagon because there's no remnants of the plane to be seen anywhere. Plane going that fast, hitting a solid structure like the Pentagon, I wouldn't expect to see much left of the plane. The plane is aluminum. You know what I mean? It's aluminum and plastic. When you get in an airplane, it's like flying in a toothpaste tube. You know that, right? Except the wings are filled with aviation fuel. It's a toothpaste tube with explosive wings. That's how you need to think about it. I love flying. This is not me attacking flying. I just want to have a realistic expectation for what you're experiencing. There's a hatchet-like device. It looks like something out of the Middle Ages in the cockpit. In the unlikely event that the plane does crash and the pilot survives, or the co-pilot, somebody survives in the cockpit, it's to cut your way out of the plane because it's an aluminum can. You just need to, all you need is scissors and you can cut your way out. Like, don't press too hard on that side anymore. You know, how you fall asleep, you lean in on that thing. You sure that's a good idea? So, one of the things that also comes up is that none of this was all staged by the United States. And in fact, what we did was we emptied out the passengers from the airplanes and flew empty planes in. The whole thing was staged. There was even talk of an Israeli conspiracy, that maybe the Israelis were somehow involved. And the rumor was there were no Jews in the Twin Tower. Why weren't there any Jews in the Twin Tower? So automatically we were in like anti-Semitism, protocols of the elders of Zion land, because that had to happen early on. And in fact, there was a little bitty kernel of truth in the story that got expanded upon, and it's this. The Mossad, the Israeli intelligence, and for that matter, the Egyptian intelligence, had warned us the week before there was an attack imminent coming the next week. And then people took that warning that came from two of our, they're not officially allies, right? We've never signed a treaty of alliance with either state, but they're definitely friends. And you know, we didn't take the warning seriously. That's the only story. There's no Jewish conspiracy to kill Americans or something. But that's where our mind started going. And then there was this basic general feeling that this was an inside job. There were explosives put in the Twin Towers. And it wasn't the planes that took down the Twin Towers. Explosives were detonated to bring the Twin Towers down. And there was apparently a newspaper article in New Zealand that said that the Twin Towers came down before they came down. And people were like, oh, what's going on? And right, it's like these layers and all these conspiracy theories start to run. And there were bumper stickers everywhere. 9/11 was an inside job. And Alex Jones took off with it, and he's like talking about how it's very clear that there was an inside job, and contrails are making people sick. And there are these aliens who are lizard folk who have taken over the United States government where they worship Satan and they eat children. And it was insane. It was insane. It was crazy land. Now, part of it was just plain old-fashioned racism. Americans, there was a group of Americans who couldn't put it into their head that 19 Arabs had hurt us so badly. It just seemed weird that these subhumans that we slaughter wholesale, we're killing them by the hundreds of thousands per year, could get us back in an act of vengeance like that. I mean, think about it. The small number for what we did in Iraq, the conservative number, from 1990 when we first implemented the sanctions to 2011 when we withdrew before we went back in 2014. So we're just doing that 21 years, 90 to 2011. The small number is 2.5 million Iraqis. The big number is 3.9 million. Let's do the small number. We don't have to do the big number. The small number is already a catastrophe, right? Hitler killed 5.1 to 5.4 million Jews, 2.5 million Iraqis. We're halfway there. It's the same ballpark now. Playing a similar game, it doesn't need to be an exaggeration in case 3.9 is the exaggeration number. That's a 9/11 every 10 days for 21 years. That's a 9/11 every 10 days for 21 years. And that's not taking into consideration all the refugees we created. That's not taking into consideration all the orphans we created. That's not taking into consideration all the infrastructure that was destroyed, the businesses that were shut down, the catastrophe that the economy went through. So here's this moment he loses. Right, you just think of FDR and the fireside chats, or Winston Churchill talking about fear, and here's this gutless coward hiding in the air. It's amazing. Talk about failure of leadership. And then he finally does talk to us. Well, what does he say? The American economy is collapsing. I need you to go out and shop. Go buy a car. He actually told us to go buy a car. So we're all mourning, and his solution to everything is, wouldn't it be great if you had a brand new Honda in your driveway? No, that's not what I want to hear from you. The economy is dying? First of all, I'm baffled. Why? Why is the economy dying? 3,000 people died. Yeah, that sucks, but there's 300 million of us. So why is the economy dying? 2 buildings got knocked down. Now that sucks. Why is the economy dying? This is the United States of America. We're the richest country on earth. There's nothing that should be damaging the economy. Well, because the airplanes couldn't fly for a week, right? Because you don't know this, but there were no airplanes flying. It was really weird. You look in the sky and there was no contrails anywhere. And I swear, everything got quieter. There was like this moment of time, it lasted like 2 weeks, where we were really nice to each other. People were like walking around going, hey, no, after you. And then, no road rage. People are letting each other drive out. You wanted to come in front of me? Yeah, come. It was amazing. It was really weird. It's like we had become humans for 2 weeks. And then we went and bought that brand new Honda. We had to bail out the airline industry. Now the airline industry, it turned out, lied to us. There was nothing that 9/11 really did to them that hurt them. Yeah, for a week they couldn't fly, but so what? What really hurt them was they had a terrible economic model, and then they used 9/11 as an excuse, and they lied to us, and they said that they were in trouble. So we had to bail them out. So we did. Southwest Airlines never got in trouble. Why? Because they had a fantastic business model. If 9/11 was so catastrophic, why wasn't Southwest Airlines in trouble? And that's the end of that. So George Bush Jr. immediately starts talking about revenge. Not let's reflect. Not let's take a moment to figure out what just happened. It's somebody needs to die. But we have a problem because the 19 people we want to kill are already dead. That's tough. That's a tough one to overcome because then who do you kill? Well, obviously Osama Bin Laden needs to die, but that's a problem too because you got to remember the Bin Laden family and the Bush family were interconnected. Osama Bin Laden's dad is the chief architect in Saudi Arabia. He bailed out George Bush Jr. when George Bush Jr. bankrupted his oil company, Arbusto. So what does that telephone call go like? Hey, remember me? I'm George. I'm the president. I'm going to try and kill your son. Is that okay? You helped me out a few years back. I really appreciate it, but yeah, I'm coming after your son. And so what are we going to do? We're going to invade Afghanistan. Well, that's fascinating to me because what did Afghanistan have to do with anything? You go, well, Osama bin Laden was there. Okay, so let's do a brain exercise, just a thought experiment. Let's say I commit a terrorist attack in Moscow. But first, I moved to Germany. So I'm living in Hamburg, Germany. I go to Moscow. I commit a terrorist attack. Should Russia attack Germany, or should Russia attack Texas? In this scenario, you're saying they should attack Germany, right? Because Osama Bin Laden wasn't from Afghanistan. He was from Saudi Arabia. In fact, al-Qaeda, hardly any of them were Afghans. They were mostly Egyptians and Saudis and Arabs from, they weren't just Arabs, there were Pakistanis in it. Like it was a mix of, it was international fighters dedicated to fighting the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan. And they were our friends. They were our allies that we were funding and training. Osama bin Laden was our friend. Al-Qaeda was one of the forces fighting alongside the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen was funded and trained by the CIA. Charlie Wilson, the Texas representative, that was his idea. He pushed this through and got us involved in the Afghan war as a proxy war against the Soviet Union. Why? Because we wanted vengeance for what they did to us in Vietnam. Isn't that cool? And so, organizations like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were born out of this thing. The idea behind Al-Qaeda was it was going to bring in all these foreign volunteers from the Muslim world to Afghanistan to fight the Russians alongside us and our allies. We weren't directly fighting, but obviously CIA operations. So, we're going to get vengeance by invading Afghanistan. But here's the twist. I don't think you should attack either Germany or Texas. It was a group of individuals who did this, not an entire country. Since when is collective punishment okay? You know what I'm saying? I mean, isn't collective punishment the argument the Nazis kept using? Well, we're going to go ahead and invade Poland. Now, in the case of Poland, there was a trumped-up event. They got some prisoners. They put them in Polish uniforms, and they shot them. And then they said they said Polish soldiers had invaded Germany. But then it's justified to do a collective punishment event because a group of rogue Poles attacked you? It wasn't like the Polish army crossed the border. Yeah, this is nonsensical. Now you go, well, but we need Osama bin Laden. Okay, why not do a special forces operation and go find him? Why not have your CIA operatives hunt him down? I mean, we can kill presidents. Surely we can find a guy hiding in caves. Well, turns out in Pakistan, wasn't actually in Afghanistan. They were looking for him in the wrong country. Just hanging out with his family, watching TV, totally retired, thinking, wow, they're still looking for me in Afghanistan. Wonder when they're going to figure out I'm not there. 10 years it took us to figure it out. 10 years. That's failed intel. So, okay, we're going to do a vengeance war. Where? I know it's Afghanistan, but what's its nickname? Graveyard of Empires. You're going to attack that place? The British Empire. When I say it, you think, oh, yeah, they were amazing. They conquered India. I mean, right there, you don't even know about Canada and Egypt and South Africa. Just the God, India is mind-blowing. This itty-bitty little island where they fry their tomatoes and boil their steak. Conquered India. It's like out of a sci-fi movie. It should be impossible. The last time I said this in a lecture, I invoked Eddie Izzard, and I forgot his name in the lecture, so I'm giving him credit for a previous lecture where I invoked Eddie Izzard. So Jeremy reminded me it was Eddie Izzard. I love Eddie Izzard, so I'm sorry I accidentally stole your material without crediting you. He's changed me, Eddie Izzard has. If you don't know what I'm talking about, YouTube later, Eddie Izzard. Some of you are going to hate my guts for all eternity after that, but The rest of you will understand. It's okay. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with you hating me. So, we're going to attack a country that the British attacked 3 times already when they were the greatest empire on the planet at the time. And they were defeated 3 times already. And then the Soviet Union attacked Afghanistan, and they too were defeated. And now we're going to go in again, but this time it's a NATO operation because we've invoked Article 5. Article 5 says, if one NATO state is attacked, all NATO states are automatically at war. We were just attacked. Now, we weren't attacked by Afghanistan. In fact, the first thing out of the Taliban's mouth is, hey, whoa, 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 we're ready to help you hunt down Osama Bin Laden. That guy's rogue. I can't believe he attacked you like that. And our response was, no, we're coming after you. And they're like, wait a minute, what? You're going to do what? Why are you doing this? Are you sure you want to do this? This is Afghanistan. This could turn out ugly for you. You'll see. But no, we did it anyway because we thought collective punishment. Even though not a single one of the 19 hijackers was from Afghanistan. Even though Osama bin Laden wasn't from Afghanistan. To make matters worse, it was a foreign policy catastrophe because we had Iran help us, and then George Bush Jr. in January of 2002 says that Iran is part of an axis of evil, and any attempt that we had made to normalize relations with with Iran got thrown out the window as we're conducting operations in Afghanistan using Iran's help. The irony is when we fight ISIL in Iraq, in 2014, we're fighting alongside Iranian soldiers in Iraq. So it's just 2 times we've been on the same side in a war with Iranians, and we just can't get past how bitter we are about 1979. And then, in 2002, while we're in this war in Afghanistan, reacting in this really crazy over-the-top way, trying to pin down a country that looks like it can't be conquered, the Bush administration starts talking about Iraq. And people like me are freaking out because everybody knows Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And the Bush administration is saying, yeah, but they have weapons of mass destruction. So for the record, I own a firearm. So you need to come right now and shoot me because there's a distinct possibility at some point down the road I might shoot you. That's the logic. Even if Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, you're saying you have to go to war to get rid of them because you're worried they're going to attack you at some point. But here's the twist. We knew they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. This wasn't like we thought they did, we got there and went, oh, oops. It was, we knew they didn't, this was a lie from the beginning. Had nothing to do with anything. How did we know? Scott Ritter, the UN weapons inspector, had basically given Iraq the clean bill of health. He had identified 98% of the serial numbers on the VX, sarin gas, mustard gas rockets that we had given them. That's how we knew what the serial numbers were. 98%, who cares about the remaining 2% at that point? Especially since the last time Iraq had used those weapons was in the Iran-Iraq War. And so here we were in this weird situation where all of a sudden we're talking about going to war with Iraq.
I take the threat very seriously. I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction very seriously. I remember the fact that he has invaded 2 countries before. I know for a fact that he's poisoned his own people. He doesn't believe in the worth of each individual. He doesn't believe in public dissent. I look forward to a dialogue. We must anticipate problems before the come. I will remind them that history has called us into action, that we love freedom, that we'll be deliberate, patient, and strong in the values that we adhere to. But we can't let the world's worst leaders blackmail, threaten, hold freedom-loving nations hostage with the world's worst weapons. And allies with weapons of mass destruction. Some of these regimes have been pretty quiet since September the 11th, but we know their true nature. North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror, while an unelected few repress the Iranian people's hope for freedom. Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade. This is a regime that has already used poison gas to murder thousands of its own citizens, leaving the bodies of mothers huddled over their dead children. This is a regime that agreed to...
We get the vote, the Congress votes to authorize the president to attack Iraq, even though they should definitely stop this. And then there's mass demonstrations, global level mass demonstrations, like the world has never seen. Never, not even in the 60s. On February 15, I'm double checking my year, I think so. That's the year I have in my head. Sorry, the day I have in my head. It's 2003, February 15. If I remember correctly, it was 15 million protesters on the same day around the world. There's like 2.5 million in Berlin, 2 million in Rome, like 1.5 million in London. There's 500,000 in New York, 500,000 in San Francisco. All on the same day. The world had never seen anything like it before. To protest a war that hadn't happened yet. We attack Iraq on Iranian New Year's. I thought that'd be cool. So we attack them. It was March 21st here, but it's March 22nd there, the moment we attack. And we go to war against Iraq, a country that had never attacked us, never had the means to attack us, never tried to attack us. Isn't that weird? That had been our ally in the 80s. And it was just completely random. And it was brutal. According to Johns Hopkins, we killed 1.3 to 2 million Iraqis from 2003 to 2011 in an 8-year span of time. For a country that never attacked us, never had the means to attack us. Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder called up George Bush Jr. and said, please don't do this. Germany did this. Poland, September 1st, 1939. Don't be like us. You're the United States of America. You're supposed to be the good guy. We've hinged everything we do in Europe on you're the good guy. NATO is based on you're the good guy. We did it anyway. In fact, George Bush Jr. refused to talk to Gerhard Schroeder again until Gerhard Schroeder was replaced in an election by Angela Merkel. We just basically cut off ties with the Federal Republic of Germany, our most important ally. You're like, no, isn't it UK? Germany has the second largest NATO military. It's Germany. Germany is the locomotive for the European Union, right? Germany is the heart center. Spoiler alert on this, there's no such thing as the euro. It's a made-up currency. There's the German mark. Germany has given Europe the German mark, but to make it feel like it's everybody, they called it the euro. Just so we're clear. Right? And Belgium called us up. France called us up. And they said, please don't do this. You don't need to do this. Why are you doing this? And we did it anyway. So anyway, we go to the Iranians and we go, hey, let's work together. And the Iranians go, yeah, we got the Northern Alliance. We hook up. They basically hand us the Northern Alliance. We decide we're going to do an air war. We're going to send in elite troops and then use the Northern Alliance to sweep the country. and we work together with Iran, and the Taliban government is destroyed. We capture huge chunks of Afghanistan within just a few months. And then comes George Bush Jr.'s first State of the Union address in January of 2002. He gets up, TV, and he goes, "There is an axis of evil." And it runs through, apparently he never looked at a map when he came up with this, North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. And Iran goes, "Wait, what? What? We just worked with you so you could take out the Taliban in Afghanistan, and now we're part of your axis of evil?" The president of Iran at the time was a guy named Khatami. Khatami was hope. He was a reformer who was transitioning Iran in the direction that pretty much most people would agree is the right one. I'm sure there's somebody out there who doesn't like what he was doing. They were the hardliners in Iran, in fact. But most people in the world were thrilled with Khatami. He was so sweet. And he is the guy who backed supporting the U.S. in Afghanistan. When Iran gets called part of the axis of evil, the hardliners then use that to say, look, that dumbass, he worked with the United States, and they basically take him out. And it's effectively the end of Iran's best hope for reform. And then the Iranians turn around and elect Ahmadinejad in the next election. They elect their Bush. Right, stupid and cruel, that guy. I swear they found the same guy, even with the weird monkey eyes. Have you ever noticed Junior kind of had that weird monkey eye thing going? Well, so did Ahmadinejad. It was like really weird. Like I'm pretty sure they share a common grandparent somewhere. Did you have a question?
Do we have to prove and have evidence of why we chose that to deem evil?
Apparently not. No, there's no court. I mean, right, there is a world court. Okay, so there is a world court. We actually helped found it. It's part of the UN. There's actually two now. There's the criminal court in The Hague, and then there's the world court. And we have not signed on to the criminal one. We won't be a part of it. United States, People's Republic of China, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, basically the war criminal countries won't sign it. But the UN-based one, we are a part of, and we in 1980, I can't remember the year. I wanted to say 84, but don't quote me on that, even though it's being filmed. So we mined the harbors in Nicaragua. That's kind of an act of war, right? If I put bombs in your harbors so that when the ships pull in, they explode and sink, I'm pretty sure that's an act of war. Nicaragua took us to the World Court because some of their ships had sunk, and they took us to the World Court. And the World Court found for Nicaragua. You know what the Reagan administration did? We don't have to pay attention to it. We walked away from it. So when proof is part of the issue, we just ignore the ruling. Of course, that was the end of the World Court, because now anytime there's a ruling against the country in the World Court, they just go, well, the United States ignored it, we can too. Right? We might as well just disband it and start over with a new institution. So anyway, proof doesn't matter. So now, we go into Afghanistan, we don't really secure it. Just for the record, we do a really bang-up job of not doing much of anything. We capture Kabul, we capture a few of the major cities, we capture the airports that go with it, and then we let the Northern Alliance sweep the rest of the country, and we create a really unstable situation, because the Northern Alliance, they're a bunch of warlords, and each warlord kind of carves out his own piece, and then they rule like nobles, like in a noble fiefdom. We established a noble fiefdom in Afghanistan as opposed to establishing a state with a state apparatus. We actually got rid of the state. It was the Taliban state. We get rid of that and replace it with a noble fiefdom. And of course, that's going to turn to hell in a handbasket. But before it does, it's actually quite calm for the first few years. Before it does, Junior immediately starts talking about Iraq. And I was like, whoa, there it is. 2002, Iraq, especially after Labor Day. Because every good advertiser knows if you're going to start an ad campaign, you start it right after Labor Day. And after Labor Day in 2002, Junior just keeps going on about Iraq this, Iraq that, Iraq this. And they would always do this. They would go, Iraq and al-Qaeda, Saddam Hussein and Osama Bin Laden, in the same sentence. So you keep associating the two together. Iraq, there wasn't a single hijacker on 9/11 who was from Iraq. Al-Qaeda actually Osama Bin Laden actually put a price on Saddam Hussein's head. I think it was $10 million. If you could kill Saddam Hussein, that's not an act of friendship. That's, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, maybe $10, and it could be like a joke. You could have a little, if you kill so-and-so, I'll give you $10. Odds are nobody will actually try to collect, and it'll be funny. But 10 million, somebody's going to try and collect on that, because that's a lot of money. Anyway, so they're probably not friends. There's zero evidence they ever worked together because they hate each other's guts. So Colin Powell gets up in front of the UN, and he's got all these graphics and all these charts and all these pictures. And he goes, we know for a fact Al-Qaeda is operating in Iraq. You know how we knew? Because the CIA was working with Al-Qaeda, our enemy, in Iraq. Because an enemy of an enemy is a friend. We're actually there working with the guys who just did 9/11 because we hate Saddam Hussein so much. Now, on top of that, he's got these pictures of trucks. And he goes, these are mobile chemical weapon manufacturing trucks. And they're trying to make biological weapons in these things too. And he brings in a vial of anthrax. It's not. It's probably just like flour. And he goes, this much anthrax would kill, I don't remember. And he like scares the crap out of everybody with all this nonsense talk. And then it turns out, you know what those mobile vehicles were? They were a form of chemical weapon. They were like the equivalent of our little the taco truck that pulls up at the construction site and does tacos and tamales, and then there's a lot of methane released, if you know what I mean. There were sandwich trucks and beans. They were doing fulmudammes and stuff. Like, yes, you will produce chemicals. It's just they're not particularly deadly, even if they are flammable. Colin Powell later on admits that, first of all, he says two things. One, he will never run for office because he never wants to soil himself again with that kind of politics that's required to be in an office. And the other thing he said is that was the most embarrassing and disgraceful episode in his entire career, when he got up in front of the UN and
Imagine how I felt the day that they finally came in and said to me, well, we don't have 4 independent sources for that biological warfare van. It's one guy, and he's loopy, and he's in a German jail, and we've never talked to him. Hello? And I'm sitting there.
Well, how did you feel?
I felt terrible. And 6 months later, the intelligence community is still standing behind their original judgments, even though nothing has been found. I understood the consequences of that failure, and as I've said on many occasions, I deeply regret that the information, some of the information, not all of it, some of the information I presented, which was multi-source, was wrong. And it is a blot on my record. But, there's nothing I can do to change that blot. All I can say.
Now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
Must stop the terror. I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive. All right.
So I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center.
That a clear connection between Saddam and September 11th must be established before we have a right to prevent the next September 11th. Well, I think not. There is no question whatsoever that Saddam is seeking and is working and is advancing towards the development of nuclear weapons. No question. For atomic bombs. Decades ago, it was possible to thwart Saddam's nuclear ambitions by bombing a single installation. But today, nothing less than dismantling his regime will do. Because Saddam's nuclear program has fundamentally changed in those 2 decades. He no longer needs one large reactor to produce the deadly material necessary for atomic bombs. He can produce it in centrifuges the size of washing machines that can be hidden throughout the country. And I want to remind you that Iraq is a very big country. Nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons is Iraq and Iran. And Iran, by the way, is also outpacing Iraq in the development of ballistic missile systems that they hope will reach the eastern seaboard of the United States within 15 years. Now the question is, what's your next step? Knowing that 3 of these nations are developing nuclear weapons. This is not a hypothesis. It is fact. Iraq, Iran, and Libya are racing to develop nuclear weapons. Obviously, we'd like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it. The application of power is the most important thing in winning the war on terrorism. The more victories you amass, the easier the next victory becomes. The first victory in Afghanistan makes a second victory in Iraq that much easier. The second victory in Iraq will make the third victory that much easier too. Fully immaterial in my mind is the argument that America cannot oust Saddam without prior approval of the international community. Today, the United States must destroy the same regime because a nuclear-armed Saddam will place the security of our entire world at risk. And make no mistake about it, if and once Saddam has nuclear weapons, the terror network will have nuclear weapons. And once the terror network has nuclear weapons, it is only a matter of time before those weapons will be used. And the connection is not whether Iraq was directly connected to September 11th, but how do you prevent the next September 11th? And do the various critics, especially overseas, believe that a clear connection between Saddam and September 11th must be established before we have a right to prevent the next September 11th? Well, I think not.
2002, Iraq shocks the world by becoming the first country on earth to trade oil in euros instead of US dollars. This sends us into a tizzy, right? Because think about it. If every time there's an oil transaction, it has to be done in US dollars, which is how oil transactions were done up until then that means that in a way, the United States gets its little protection money for every oil transaction. You have to change the Korean currency into US dollars, and then you hand the US dollars over to Kuwait, and then the oil goes to Korea. And then Kuwait, what are they going to do? They can flip the US dollars back into their currency, or they can just leave it in the currency, in the US dollars as a reserve, right? So it's like we get a little piece of every oil transaction. Our currency wasn't backed by gold, it was backed by oil. This could set a trend, and so now there's more people who are interested in going to war with Iraq.
In October 2000, the president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, announced they would no longer be selling oil in US dollars, only in euros. Which on the surface is an innocent change. What's the big deal? The big deal is that Iraq has the 5th largest petroleum reserves in the world, and in the 2000s it had become the world's 5th largest oil producer. So when Hussein decided to start selling oil in euros instead of dollars, the US wasn't too happy. By February 2003, he has sold over 3 billion barrels of oil for 26 billion euros. A month later, the US invaded Iraq.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
In an operation ironically called Operation Iraqi Freedom. They overthrew Saddam, and by June, just 4 months later, the country was back to selling oil in dollars. Years later, a number of US officials started to let the truth seep out. Former head of US operations in Iraq, General John Abizaid, said, "Of course it's about oil. We can't really deny that." Former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan wrote in his memoir that, quote, "I'm saddened that it's politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil," end quote. And former Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel said the same in 2007. Quote, "People say we're not fighting for oil. Of course we are," end quote. Venezuela, 2002. Coincidentally, Venezuela also has large oil reserves. In fact, they have the largest proven oil reserves in the world. At the time, Hugo Chavez was in charge of Venezuela as the dictator president. But Chavez, a die-hard anti-American leader, was about to make the same grave mistake that Saddam Hussein made. He planned to start selling oil for euros instead of the mighty American dollar. Well, we can't have that now, can we? So in 2002, the US backed a coup against Chavez, which ultimately failed, but it crippled the country and its economy. Empires are built on oil. Yet despite having the largest oil reserves in the world, today Venezuela is one of the poorest economies in the world. Do other factors play into that? Many. We've talked about a few of them on this channel before. But going against the US is probably a big no-no. Libya, 2009. Eerily similar to Venezuela and Iraq, Libya has the largest oil reserves in Africa, and they weren't doing that bad. They did a great job managing all those oil revenues, building up a 143-ton gold reserve according to WikiLeaks. They had the highest GDP per capita in Africa, and Libya was on track to become the most influential country in Africa. And also similar to Venezuela and Iraq, Mummar Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, suggested all Muslim and African countries buy oil from Libya using a new currency backed by their giant gold reserves instead of US dollars. In other words, they wanted to sell oil in exchange for gold instead of US dollars, and other major African governments were ready to support. But I think we can all guess what happened next. NATO led a military coalition into Libya in the name of freedom, of course, and on August 20th, 2011, Mummar Gaddafi was executed by Libyan militias, backed by US drone strikes. Years later, it was discovered in Hilary Clinton's emails that NATO really wanted to overthrow Gaddafi's government, mainly because of this plan for an African gold-backed currency, supported by Libya's oil reserves. This was Libya before, and this is Libya today. A failed state with widespread poverty and an ongoing civil war. Why? Because each of these countries tried to break away from using the dollar as payment for their oil, and each of them faced the consequences of America's wrath. Out of all of them, none were able to recover from America's interventions in the name of freedom and in taking down an axis of evil.
And their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, servants of evil, the cult of evil.
A monumental struggle of good versus evil.
And they usually ended up far worse than they were before. All these countries had problems, but all of these countries had huge economic potential despite their dictator leaders. But as soon as they moved away from selling oil in dollars, the US swooped in and quickly put an end to the party. And they're not alone. Which begs the question, why is it so important for oil to be only sold in US dollars? What's the big deal? Why is America so quick to liberate people as soon as this oil for dollars arrangement is threatened?
It's not about money. It's about sending a message.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
You are saying today that in the next few days, the president's going to have to make a very difficult decision. Is war now inevitable?
Well, the president, of course, is on his way to meet in the Azores with the Spanish and British prime ministers. We're coming, I think, to the end of the diplomatic phase, if you will. The president's done everything he could, gone the extra mile to try to get this matter resolved through the United Nations. But he's made it abundantly clear that if the UN is not willing to enforce its own resolutions, that we may then be left with no choice but for the United States and others who agree with us to proceed to disarm Saddam Hussein. And we are prepared to do that, and obviously given where we are both diplomatically as well as in the region, we're getting close to the point where the president's going to have to make an important decision.
Well, short of leaving, is there anything that Saddam Hussein can do at this point to avoid military action?
It's hard to see anything other than his departure that would give the international community any confidence that he would in fact live up to those requirements and obligations. The difficulty, we've seen it in the past, inspectors go in after the Gulf War, for example. We stripped him of a lot of that capability. Defectors told us where it was. We were able to get a lot of his chemical and biological nuclear program pulled down. But as soon as they were gone, he was back in business again. And if he stays in power, has that flow of significant sums coming off oil production, some 3 million barrels a day, he will devote those resources to rebuilding his biological, chemical, and nuclear program as soon as nobody's watching any longer. That's been his pattern for over 20 years, and there's no reason to believe it would be any different in the future.
What if he did leave? What if he left this afternoon? Would we still go in?
Well, if he left, obviously I'm going to be careful here not to speculate. I think our goal and objective, and I think the objective of many of the Iraqi people and the opposition as well too, is to establish a broadly representative government in Iraq that has due regard for the various groups and for the human rights, protects the territorial integrity of Iraq. All of those kinds of considerations would go into what comes next. And the United States and the international community, both folks in the region as well as around the world, have a vested interest in seeing to it that if in fact Saddam Hussein leaves, that a new government is stood up that meets those and satisfies those various standards. It would not be enough, for example, for him to turn it over to one of his sons, both of whom are bad actors, and then depart. It would have to be a new, truly representative government that represented a fundamental break with the past with respect to Iraq and the Iraqi people. And how that would come about, I think at this stage is difficult to speculate on. Clearly the United States would want to help in that effort.
If we do have to take action, do you think it will be a long war or a short war?
My own judgment, based on my time as Secretary of Defense and having operated in this area in the past, I'm confident that our troops will be successful, and I think it'll go relatively quickly. But you can't
months?
count on that. Weeks rather than months. There's always the possibility of complications that you can't anticipate, but I have great confidence in our troops. The men and women who serve in our military today are superb. Our capabilities as a force are the finest the world has ever known. They're very ably led by General Tommy Franks and Secretary Rumsfeld. And so I have great confidence in the conduct of the military campaign. The really challenging part of it, to some extent, may come in the aftermath. Once the military segment is over and we move to trying to stand up a new government and turn over to the Iraqi people the responsibilities to govern.
What do you think?
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign. I want Americans and all the world to know that coalition forces will make every effort to spare innocent civilians from harm. We come to Iraq with respect for its citizens, for their great civilization, and for the religious faiths they practice. We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people.
Cases and this gonna power. Bring me back to the pizza kitchen. Now clocking in now.
Crazy facts about the trial of Saddam Hussein. In May 2005, the then US Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld met with Saddam Hussein and offered him the chance of freedom if he appeared on television and requested that armed Iraqi groups entered into a ceasefire with Allied forces. Saddam rejected the offer and instead went to trial. During the first hearing in the trial, Saddam, appearing without counsel, rejected the charges that were aimed at him and said this is all theatre, the real criminal is Bush, as well as suggesting that the trial was akin to a play to help Bush win another election. He also challenged the legitimacy of the 5 judges, and after being asked to identify himself by one of the judges, Saddam said, "You are an Iraqi, you know who I am." In December 2005, Saddam heard testimony of 3 anonymous witnesses who were tortured by Iraqi guards, including a 16-year-old girl who alluded to the fact that as well as being tortured, she had also been sexually abused. After the 3rd witness, a man, testified that he was taken by security forces along with his family, and Saddam said, "Does anyone ask Saddam Hussein whether he was tortured? I live in an iron cage covered by a tent under American democratic rule. You should come and see my cage. The Americans and the Zionists want to execute Saddam Hussein."
ظل واقف نتلو قرار الحكم ظل واقف واقف نتلو قرار الحكم استمع إلى قرار المحكمة واقفا اسمع القرارات اي واقفا كن واقفا قاعد اوقف وقفوا حكي وياك قررت المحكمة الحكم على المدان صدام حسين المجيد بالإعدام شنقا حتى الموت لارتكاب قتل عمد كجريمة ضد الإنسانية وفق المادة 12 أولا أليف بدلالة المادة 12 أولا ثانيا ثالثا رابعا من قانون المحكمة الجنائية العراقية العليا رقم 10 لسنة 2005 وحددت العقوبة وفق أحكام المادة 406 أليف من قانون العقوبات رقم 111 لسنة 1969 المعدل بدلالة المادة 24 من قانون المحكمة الجنائية العراقية العليا رقم 10 لسنة 2005 قرارا
هذا التقدير للمحكمة.
ثانيا الحكم على صدام حسين مجيد نحن أهلها بالسجن 10 سنوات لارتكابه إبعاد السكان أولا دال بدلالة المادة 15 أولا ثانيا ثالثا رابعا من قانون المحكمة الجنائية العراقية العليا رقم 10 لسنة 2005 وحددت العقوبة استنادا لأحكام المادة 421 من قانون العقوبات رقم 111 لسنة 2020 من قانون المحكمة الجنائية العراقية العليا لسنة 2005 قرارا وبالاتفاق كل الذين انحرفوا. ثالثا الحكم على المدان صدام حسين المجيد بالسجن 10 سنوات لارتكابه التعذيب كجريمة ضد الإنسانية وفقا لأحكام المادة 12 أولا واو بدلالة المادة 15 أولا ثانيا ثالثا رابعا من قدم 333 من قانون العقوبات رقم 111 لسنة 1969 المعدل قرارا بدلالة المادة 24 من قانون 10 2005. الله أكبر. رابعا تنفذ العقوبة الأشد بحق المدان استنادا أحكام المادة 142 من قانون العقوبات رقم 111 لسنة 1969 المعدل قرارا حضوريا قابلا للتمييز. تم رفع الجلسة.
Intelligence headquarters at Casimir. Saddam, as we said, dressed in this raincoat, black suit, with his feet and hands tied, being taken from the execution room to the gallows. He is now being told that he can have the hood, but he refused that. He went to the rope, seeing that noose before him, and he was then given this scarf to be tied around his neck, for the rope to be tied around that, and an indication that he faced his final moments with some bravery, shouting, "God is great," and that the nation would live on, and that Palestine was Arab. Final words of defiance. Tim Marshall, our Foreign Affairs editor, is with us. Tim, as we see these pictures, the other elements, of course, are the rusty old railings, the unpainted concrete, the sort of scene of a common criminal almost meeting his final moments rather than the former head of state?
Well, he was... Who's the terrible English comedian who's not funny at all? Mike something. Anyway, you've forgotten him, thank God, let it go, don't look him up. They're standing there next to each other. They're trying to do some kind of New Orleans fundraiser on TV, and Kanye says, George Bush Jr. hates black people, right there, live on TV. Mike Myers, and Mike Myers is like, it was, no, yeah, it's before the Confederate flag, sure. Yeah. George Bush is this catastrophe, every level, 2 botched wars, because by 2008 we know we're losing both Iraq and Afghanistan, right? It's like, the writing is beyond on the wall, it's a disaster. So that looks like, you know, the Vietnam War for both LBJ and Nixon. Like, how do you fit so many disasters in one presidency? He did it. He truly was remarkable. By 2006, the American public was done with that guy. We were finished. We handed both houses of Congress to the Democrats.
The new Prime Minister of India is, no.
In order for us to get the framework, the groundwork, not framework, the groundwork to discuss a framework for peace, to lay the, all right.
Fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
Holy hell, kid.
When you said that George W. Bush, which was our last Republican president, a man I respect greatly, a person that we really fought for when he was up against a lot of pressure, that he lied to get us in the war in Iraq. That stung me very deeply. Okay. I don't believe that. I'm just wondering, given some time passing, perhaps you've rethought that. Would you be willing to rethink that?
Well, a lot of people agree with what I said, and I'm not talking about lying. I'm not talking about not lying. Nobody really knows why we went into Iraq. The Iraqis did not knock down. It was not Saddam Hussein that knocked down the World Trade Center. Okay,
that's just what you said was they lied. They said there were weapons of mass destruction, and there were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass.
Well, there are a lot of people that think that. There were a lot of people that think, look, bottom line, there were no weapons of mass destruction. They said there are weapons of mass destruction. I was against the war when it started.
Do you think the president of the United States, George W. Bush, lied?
Well, look,
to
I'm not going to
American
get you a
people?
vote, but that's okay.
I'm just giving you another shot
Let me tell you something. I'll tell you very simply. It may have been the worst decision going into Iraq, may have been the worst decision anybody has made, any president has made in the history of this country. That's how bad it is, okay? Here's what happens. We have spent $2 trillion in Iraq and fighting Iraq. $2 trillion. $2 trillion. Thousands of lives, right? We have wounded warriors who I love all over the place. These are the most incredible. These are braver than all of us in this room put together. I look at the attitude, and I work with them, and these are great people. We got nothing. We have nothing. We're not even there. We can't even make a phone call right now.
But to his question,
I'm trying to separate.
Let me tell you. Do I know?
Do you believe he lied, or did he?
I can tell you this. I don't whether he lied or not. He went into Iraq. It was a horrible decision.
In 2008, we didn't just hand the presidency to the Democrats. We didn't just keep both houses with the Democrats. We gave Obama a filibuster-proof Senate. He had 60 senators. It's amazing. We were so done with George Bush Jr. that William F. Buckley's son showed up at the DNC and endorsed Obama. William F. Buckley, like the conservative who brought conservatism back when it wasn't popular in the 60s and the 70s. His son betrayed his own movement, and by the way, got thrown off of William F. Buckley's newspaper, right, because they were like, get out, you're not a real conservative anymore. You know who else showed up at the DNC? Dwight David Eisenhower's granddaughter. She got up in front of everybody and she said, it's not that I've become a Democrat, I'll never be a Democrat. It's that the Republican Party has moved away from me, I've lost my party. I can't relate to it anymore, so I'm here to endorse Barack Obama. You know who else showed up at the DNC in 2008 in Denver, Colorado? Nancy and Ronald Reagan. Of course, not the president, because he's dead. It's Ronald Reagan Jr., his son. Ronald Reagan Jr. and Nancy Reagan walk on to the stage at the Democratic National Convention. They didn't endorse Obama, to be clear. They held back. They were there. That was an endorsement. Just showing up was an endorsement. They officially only talked about stem cell research. That was the only thing they were there to talk about. But in reality, they were at the DNC. So, in the middle of all of this, we elect a black man. And it triggers the same exact conspiracy theory mechanism that 9/11 did. But it's on top of 9/11. It's compounded on 9/11. All of a sudden, there's all these people saying, don't raise our taxes. And the Tea Party movement is created.
You describe the Tea Party movement.
Well, the Tea Party was around 2010. It started from the Ron Paul campaigns and in opposition to the banker bailouts. But it was all against like record government spending,
But
debt.
the way it was positioned as a bunch of racist.
Oh yeah, right away, of course, because they
I had no clue that that's what they were pissed off about government spending.
That was the whole thing.
Did you know that?
I knew government spending was the main one, but they quickly got positioned as like, oh, that's the racist guys. Like, stay away from those.
These are the same racists who ended up voting for Trump.
Yeah.
Is running. He's just unveiled a huge plan of his own. Congressman, thanks very much for coming in. So let's talk a little bit about your jobs proposal. We heard a little bit from the President of the United States. He's got his ideas. Yours is the most revolutionary, shall we say. You want to cut $1 trillion in spending over how long?
Over 3 years. But the first year is $1 trillion, balanced budget in 3 years. So cut $1 trillion the first year.
The first year, and you want to do that by eliminating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cabinet positions, right?
Right. The problem we have is I think the radicals have been in charge. The people who believe in spending and deficits don't matter and we can be any place in the world and you can print up money forever. And they've been doing this for about 40 years. So this is an inevitable problem that we have today. And yet I think the country, people are waking up. People in Washington, the bureaucrats and the other politicians, the other candidates running for this office, I think they're living in a different world.
Because your plan is pretty radical. Let's take a look at this. You would cut, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Department of Energy, 100,000 jobs right there. Department of Education, 4,200 jobs. Department of Commerce, 38,000 jobs. Department of Interior, 70,000 jobs. Department of Housing and Urban Development, 9,000 jobs. That's 221,000 government jobs you would seek to eliminate over 3 years.
But they're non-productive, so they go back in. They're non-productive. They're not productive jobs. You have
these jobs. These people who work in these jobs, they think they're being pretty productive.
Yeah, I know, but when government spends your money, they don't spend it as wisely as you do. You spend it more diligently and smartly, and the investments are much better. So governments aren't smart enough to do that.
For example, the Department of Energy, all of America's nuclear power is related to the Department of Energy. What are you going to do with America's nuclear arsenal?
Why subsidize anybody? Why subsidize nuclear over solar? I mean, let the market
So would you just get rid of the nuclear bombs that the United States has?
Well, you don't need. We have enough to blow up the world about 20 times, and people are arguing for more. They want more military spending. I want less military spending, but we can blow up the world, 20 times, and they want more
so
weapons.
So you would eliminate that nuclear arsenal?
No, I wouldn't eliminate it. I'd have enough to defend our country.
Your plan also has a huge cut in defense spending and in the number of jobs at the DOD, the Department of Defense.
Right. I don't cut anything from defense. I cut military. There's a big difference. Defending this country is one thing.
So explain the difference.
Militarism is buying weapons to subsidize the military-industrial complex to build weapons that we don't need. I mean, why do we need 7,000 drones dropping bombs in any speck of the earth in order to defend this country?
So the $700 billion a year Defense Department budget, which obviously finances the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, what would it go down to in a Ron Paul administration?
Well, over a period of time, drastically lower, but the first year, I think goes down $200 billion, down to
$200 billion in the first year alone.
Yeah. Because it doesn't really help us. It harms us by doing this. And we need a stronger national defense, not a weaker one. Just spending money doesn't necessarily help us.
I suspect that when it comes to this issue, defense spending, you're further apart from your fellow Republican candidates than you are from the Democrats.
Yeah, but I'm closer to the people and I'm closer to the military. I get more money from the military, active military duty, twice as much as all the other Republican candidates put together. The military people know exactly what I'm talking about. They know these wars aren't going well and that we shouldn't be there. We literally, in the last 10 years, have added $4 trillion of our debt because of this militarism around the world.
Because I remember you and Barney Frank have actually cooperated in seeking to cut defense spending.
Yes, and I think the American people know this. I think they're tired of paying for Germany's defense, Japan and South Korea. I mean, what's the purpose?
So is this going to resonate in a Republican presidential contest? Because right now, you're trying to get the Republican presidential nomination. You go out there, are Republican voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Florida, South Carolina, are they going to listen to you?
So far, so good. I think it's doing very well. And I think when they hear the truth, they know they're hearing the truth. And I really think the people are way ahead of the politicians. I've believed this for many, many years. And that's why you have to have Tea Party movements and sit-ins on Wall Street, because the people are annoyed with this. They know these bailouts and expending cannot last. We cannot continue to do this. Our national debt is up $4 billion a day. I mean, where are we going to attack? I think the easiest place to attack is overseas. All the foreign aid and all the militarism.
So you bring all the foreign aid to zero?
Sure. I mean, unless you want to donate it yourself. Everybody can donate what they ever, and they're going to be richer, and they can pick up their friends in their country, and it used to be that way.
You've been in some major disputes in other presidential debates with Republican candidates over U.S. policy towards Iran. Last week, the Justice Department said that Iran, at the highest levels, they didn't go how high, at the highest levels, they said was seeking to assassinate the Saudi ambassador in Washington. If you were president and that report came to you from your CIA, your Justice Department, your FBI, what would you do about that?
I'd check it very carefully for the facts, because now the facts are filtering out. They've arrested him, and that's fine. He could be a very dangerous person. Maybe he'll get a day in court, but I predict they won't, because I don't think they have much concrete evidence. But at least he's captured, and he's in a court, and there's going to do it. But
why do you think they don't have? Because various Republicans and Democrats, Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, you know him, he believes that the evidence is strong. Dianne Feinstein, the chair.
I think it's mostly war propaganda. They've been itching to go to war against Iran for a long, long time. This is exactly what they did leading up to the war in Iraq, and the danger was not there. I don't think the Iranians are that stupid, and yet the people here right now are getting pretty excited about it. You see, people giving us this information gave us Fast and Furious. Why they're having investigations in Washington. Fast and Furious is a fraud, but all of a sudden they believe this? No, the same people are telling us the same thing. They need to look at it very carefully. As president, I would look at this type of intelligence very carefully. I certainly wouldn't advocate going into another war. These people are using this one episode possibility of this one guy doing something. Was it a sting operation? We don't know. People are suggesting we go to war over this.
And I just want to
that is such a careless attitude.
I just want to make sure when I heard you right, you said these allegations are war propaganda on the part of the Obama administration. Is that what you're saying?
No, the people who are jumping up and down and say, oh, this is wonderful, wonderful. It's all the way up to the top. Yes, I think people who are suggesting that this is a horrendous problem would like to see us to go to war against Iran. They've been preaching this for years. I mean, they're just looking for the opportunity. What I'm saying, he's a bad guy. He's off the streets. Give him his day in court. But let's wait and see if he really does get a day in court and we get all the facts on the table. That's what I would demand.
Congressman Paul, as usual, thanks for coming in. Next time you have to tell us how you really think.
Okay, we'll work on it.
Good work. Thanks very much. Please be sure to join Ron Paul, all of the other Republican presidential candidates.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
The Tea Party movement saying don't raise our taxes is amazing because Obama's tax cuts that he was implementing were going to cut more taxes for the average white person than John McCain's tax cut had he been elected. In other words, they're saying don't raise our taxes, and here it is, the president is going to lower their taxes more than the other guy. Now, to compensate for the fact that Obama was lowering taxes for the bottom 98%, the scum, the meddlesome and troublesome outsiders of the United States, you know, the 308 million of the 311 million of us, that odious, terrible, disgusting portion of the population, he was going to raise taxes on the top 2% to offset the tax cuts for the bottom. And so because the average everyday white person was out there protesting because they wanted Obama not to raise their taxes, the Republicans then used that to force Obama to delete the tax hike on the top 2% in Congress to get it passed. Isn't that crazy? And then the birther movement kicked in. And they went hand in hand, the birther movement and the Tea Party movement. The birther movement said Obama wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Indonesia. Or maybe he was born in Kenya. They weren't really sure. Definitely not in the United States. Now, according to Obama, he was born in Hawaii. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter. The Constitution doesn't say anything about where you were born. It says the status of your birth. It says natural born citizen. It doesn't say natural born citizen in the United States. It just says natural born citizen, meaning I could be born on Mars as long as one or both of my parents is a U.S. citizen and my birth is reported in a, I don't know what the time period is, so I don't want to give you a time period. I think it's less than 2 weeks, so don't wait. Do it quickly. And then you don't have to be naturalized because now you are a natural-born citizen. Like John McCain, the guy Obama ran against, who was born in Panama. You want me to say that again? So the birther movement is angry because Obama wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Hawaii. But it doesn't matter where he was born. But the guy that he ran against wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Panama. They voted for that guy and didn't have a problem voting for that guy. In other words, where Obama was born was a dog whistle for a black man can't be president of the United States. And now a whole new set of conspiracy theories kick into full gear. And who's at the front of that? Donald J. Trump. He was one of the original birthers. And this movement takes off, and it will haunt Obama the whole presidency. And within 2 years, we are voting for the Republicans. They'll sweep and take the House and the Senate. They take the House, not the Senate, in 2010. They don't get the Senate until 2014 election. And so Obama's last 2 years, he didn't have either House of Congress. And that reaction, this pendulum swing thing that we did, was so weird that in 2016, one of the conspiracy theories that Democrats had running was that in 2016, the people who had voted for Bernie in the primaries voted for Trump in the November election. So it was the Sanders people who had cost the Democrats the election. That was one of the, it's not true statistically. There were people who voted for Bernie who voted for Trump, but it wasn't a big population appeal. It was like 3% or something ridiculous like that. Like, you can ignore that. It didn't swing the election. What happened was, that what I find interesting is more people who had voted for Obama in 2008 voted for Trump in 2016. Isn't that interesting? In other words, as part of this pendulum swing, there were all these people who had remorse for having voted for the black president, who swung over to vote now for the racist president. Because
you're a racist! Who the hell is I knew this was going to happen. Who is that? Trump's a racist.
It's Larry David. What are you doing, Larry?
I heard if I yelled that, they'd give me $5,000.
Okay, I will. 1973, the Nixon administration sued Trump for refusing to rent to black people. 1980s, Trump's casinos were accused of hiding the black staff when Trump visited. 1989, Trump took out a full-page ad arguing for the death penalty for a group of 5 black men that was Central Park 5, effectively putting a bounty on their heads and plaguing them with a lifetime of death threats. He was sued by the Justice Department for discrimination. 1991, black guys counting my money, I hate it. The only kinds of people I want counting my money are short guys that wear yarmulkes every day. I think that the black guy is lazy, and it's probably not his fault because laziness is a trait in blacks. It really is. 1992, Trump's casino was fined $200,000 for transferring black dealers off certain tables to appease racist patrons. 1993, Trump said Native American casinos shouldn't be allowed because they don't look like Indians to me. 2000, Trump ran a series of attack ads against Native American casinos alleging, with no proof, that they were guilty of crimes. 2004, Trump fired a black contestant from The Apprentice for being overeducated. 2010, Trump arguing in favor of segregating Muslims in Lower Manhattan. 2011, birtherism. Trump alleged that Obama was Kenyan based on nothing but skin color. He never apologized nor denied.
I understand the game. I've been on the other side all of my life, and they have a lot of control over our politicians. And I don't say that favorably, and I'm not sure if there's another system, but I say this: I am not accepting any money from anybody. Nobody has control of me other than the people of this country. I'm going to do the right thing.
No matter what you feel about Trump, there was a moment in that debate, Chappelle talks about it, when Trump said, of course these loopholes exist.
He said, this man doesn't pay his taxes.
He's trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So
that makes me smart.
Paid...
And then he said, if you want me to pay my taxes, then change the tax code. My friends, a star was born.
I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes. When she releases her 33,000 emails that I will release, I will...
Yeah, finally, a member of the oligarchy class says, yeah, motherfucker, we're cheating.
If the United States is a leading terrorist state, if, as you say, Britain is another example of a terrorist state, how do you distinguish between that kind of what you describe as terrorism and what they are saying, Osama Bin Laden, who's a terrorist? Make the distinction.
That's very simple. If they do it, it's terrorism. If we do it, it's counterterrorism.
We killed hundreds of thousands of people in the Middle East. I always say it's the bloodiest sand anywhere in the world. And it didn't have to be that way. The single worst decision our country ever made was to go into the Middle East. Not only the millions of people killed, and I include people on both sides. You know, some people say, oh, you shouldn't say that. I said, I'll say it, on both sides. Such a horrible thing was done. Such a horrible mistake was made.
Here's what happened in Iraq. When we left, we had left them a democracy that was intact, a military that was well equipped, and the ability then to chart their own course. And that opportunity was squandered over the course of 5 years or so because the Prime Minister, Maliki, was much more interested in consolidating his Shia base and very suspicious of the Sunnis and the Kurds, who make up the other 2/3 of the country. So what you did not see was a government that had built a sense of national unity. And if you don't have...
Or an army.
Or an army that feels committed to the nation as opposed to a particular sect. Now the good news is that the new Prime Minister, Abadi, who I met with this week, so far at least, has sent all the right signals. And that's why it goes back to what I said before, Steve. We can't do this for them. We cannot do this for them because it's not just a military problem, it is a political problem. Mm-hmm. And if we make the mistake of simply sending U.S. troops back in, we can maintain peace for a while. But unless there is a change in how, not just Iraq, but countries like Syria and some of the other countries in the region, think about what political accommodation means. Think about what tolerance means.
And do you think we can teach them that?
Well, I think this is going to be a generational challenge. I don't think that this is something that's going to happen overnight. They have now created an environment in which young men are more concerned whether they're Shia or Sunni rather than whether they are getting a good education or whether they are able to have a good job. Many of them are poor, many of them are illiterate, and are therefore more subject to these kinds of ideological appeals. And the beginning of a solution for the entire Middle East is going to be a transformation in how these countries teach their youth. What our military operations can do is to just check and roll back these networks as they appear and make sure that the time and space is provided for a new way of doing things to begin to take root. But it's going to take some time, and in the meantime, what I can...
You're saying buy them time so they can get their act together.
But in the meantime, it's not just buy them time, it's also making sure that Americans are protected, that our allies are protected.
Obviously, the war in Iraq was a big, fat mistake, all right? We spent $2 trillion, thousands of lives. We don't even have it. Iran is taking over Iraq with the second largest oil reserves in the world. Obviously, it was a mistake. So we should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. They lied. Okay. They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none. There were no weapons of mass destruction. All right.
We start talking, and they're like, yeah, you guys totally f***ed this place up. And they're like, what? He's like, yeah. He's like, we've lived here since 97 or whatever. They've been there for like 5 years. And they're like, this place was awesome. Baghdad was the coolest place in the Middle East. And we're like, what? And they're like, yeah, everybody thought Dubai was cool. Nowhere near it. Iraq or Baghdad. All the hookers and blow you ever wanted. Freaking, it was awesome. Nightlife is better than Vegas. And I was like, what are you talking about? Well, no one ever told us how Iraqis live daily. They weren't a Muslim extremist, right? They were very secular, right? The government was not an Islamic state, and the people practiced numerous different religions.
And I tried hard to be proud of my service, but all I could feel was shame. And racism could no longer mask the reality of the occupation. These were people, these were human beings. I've since been plagued by guilt anytime I see an elderly man, like the one who couldn't walk, who rolled onto a stretcher, told the Iraqi police to take him away. I feel guilt anytime I see a mother with her children, like the one who cried hysterically and screamed that we are worse than Saddam as we forced her from her home. I feel guilt anytime I see a young girl, like the one I grabbed by the arm and dragged him to the street. We were told we were fighting terrorists. The real terrorist was me, and the real terrorism is this occupation.
I feel now is
Do you think we ever should have been in Iraq?
To me, the way I feel now is it's almost irrelevant because Afghanistan. So people could say, well, Afghanistan is definitely justified because Osama Bin Laden, planned it, and then he was in Afghanistan, and they wouldn't give him up. So that war is justified. But Iraq, that wouldn't. Should we have been there? We went and sent a very small unit to just go get him in Pakistan. Couldn't we have done that in Afghanistan? Did we have to invade the whole... it's just like, now, dude, I just look at politics of everything and the politicians and that whole machine, and I don't trust anything it says. It's a mechanism. Like, war is a mechanism.
You saw how it affected vets when what happened in Afghanistan happened. It actually affected me a lot more when the rise of ISIS happened in Iraq. When that black flag flew over Fallujah and Samarra and Tikrit and all these other towns that we'd fought so hard for. And you realize, what the hell? All those guys, all this time, all that effort, and this is what we got was worse? And then in retrospect, you're like, Saddam Hussein wasn't a good guy, but it turns out those dictators actually keep the lid on things fairly well over there. And they really don't like Islamists because they try to kill them. Maybe that would have been a better idea than overturning the whole apple cart and welcoming Iran into Iraq.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. The images of 9/11 are seared into our national memory. Hijacked planes cutting through a cloudless September sky, the Twin Towers collapsing to the ground, black smoke billowing up from the Pentagon, the wreckage of Flight 93 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And yet we know that the worst images are those that were unseen to the world. The empty seat at the dinner table, children who were forced to grow up without their mother or their father, parents who would never know the feeling of their child's embrace, nearly 3,000 citizens taken from us.
The news of his death was met with celebrations across the country.
Today, the government of Libya announced the death of Mummar Gaddafi. This marks the end of a long and painful chapter for the people of Libya, who now have the opportunity to determine their own destiny in a new and democratic Libya.
Unconfirmed report.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
You leader or brother leader, what is the most appropriate
As
way?
you like, Alfredo.
Okay. When I told people that I was going to be able to interview you, they were intrigued. They are fascinated by yourself because you appear to have changed recently from the sort of person they were used to reading about and seeing on television to a different kind of Mummar Gaddafi. Why do we think that you have changed? But is there anything in particular that prompted you to go from a person who was at one point regarded as a dangerous person?
طبعا أنا قايم بثورة عندها طروحات عالمية وساهمت في حركات التحرير مساهمة فعالة والدولة المستعمرة لا تريد هذا طبعا عشان كذا صوروني بهذه الصورة. أنا يعني مبادئي ما تغيرتش عنها.
So when many people throughout the Western world in particular regarded you as a sponsor of terrorism, is that no longer the case?
طبعا الغرب يعتبر حركات التحرير حركات إرهاب عشان كذا بيتهموني بنأيد الإرهاب لأني أنا بنأيد حركة التحرر.
And do you feel any better about America since Obama has been elected president?
طبعا يعني أوباما حاجة استثنائية في ذلك شك. لكن أمريكا هي أمريكا. يعني أوباما يعني حده الأقصى 8 سنوات.
But do you think he should stay forever?
يا ريت.
Why do you think he is an exception?
يعني الطرح اللي يطرح فيه وبين نتيجة ثقافته ويبدو لجنس أنه هو يعني أفريقي وأنه أسود.
So you think his Kenyan descent is important?
طبعا كيف هو جذورة حتى عربية وإسلامية بالتالي هو يعني عقلية مختلفة عن عقلية اليانكيين الغرب.
A lot of Yankees and a lot of Americans generally would be very upset to be reminded that he has Islamic roots.
ليش شوف هم عنصريين.
Could you work with the man?
طبعا.
Do you think, could you imagine him coming to your country?
مش ضروري إذا جاء شيء جيد لكن ليس مش ضروري يعني. أنا لا أطلب منه.
Learn doing foreign policy. Ariel Sharon once said there were things I could see from here that I couldn't see from there when he became prime minister. What's the biggest takeaway for you?
I'll give you an example of a lesson I had to learn that still has, ramifications to this day, and that is our participation in the coalition that overthrew Gaddafi in Libya. I absolutely believe that it was the right thing to do. When people say, "Look at the chaos, should have let Gaddafi stay there," they forget that the Arab Spring had come full force to Libya, and had we not intervened, it's likely that Libya would be Syria, right? Because Gaddafi was not going to be able to contain what had been unleashed there, and so there'd be more death, more disruption, more destruction. But what is also true is that I think we underestimated, our European partners underestimated the need to come in full force. If you're going to do this, then it's the day after Gaddafi's gone, when everybody's feeling good and everybody's holding up posters saying, "Thank you, America." At that moment, there has to be a much more aggressive effort to rebuild societies that didn't have any civic traditions, right? You've had a despot for 40 years in place. There are no traditions there to build on, unlike Tunisia, where there was a civil society, and that's why they've been more successful in transitioning. So that's a lesson that I now apply every time I ask the question, should we intervene militarily? Do we have an answer the day after?
Many people are asking me, what do I think of Libya and its so-called newfound freedom? The fact is, what we should have done is we should have asked the rebels when they came to us, and they came to us. They were being routed by Gaddafi. They were being decimated. We should have said, we'll help you, but we want 50% of your oil. They would have absolutely said, okay, 100%. In fact, they would have said, how about 75%? So they came to us. They were nothing. They were gone. The war was over. He was taking over. Then all of a sudden, we go in through NATO, which is funded by us largely, and which is largely our weapons and our guys. We go in and absolutely decimate this guy. They take over, and now you ask for oil? You know what they're going to do? The same thing that OPEC does. They're going to rip us off like you've never seen before. They're going to charge us so much. Our economy is broke. Our country is broke. We're spending billions and billions on the so-called rebels that aren't even our friends. You watch what happens. They'll turn against us as soon as they have somebody else like Iran. And isn't it sad? We could have had anything we wanted. We could have had 50% of those oil fields. You know, in the old days, when you had a war, it's to the victor belong the spoils. We have wars with Iraq, with Afghanistan. We spend trillions of dollars. We get nothing, absolutely nothing. And those countries are falling apart. The day we leave, it's over. So we could have had something special. When the so-called rebels came to us, we should have said, fellas, we're going to help you. We want 50% of your oil. They would have said, thank you very much. We have a deal. Write it down. Sign it. We have a deal. We would have been a rich nation again. They have tremendous oil reserves in Libya. Instead, we help. We get nothing. We're very, very foolishly led. Our leaders, unfortunately, are...
Remember, the United States dollar isn't backed on any natural resource. The British pound isn't backed on any natural resource. The Canadian dollar, the European Union, their currency isn't backed on any natural resource because Europe doesn't have a lot of natural resources. Africa does. So if they would have been successful in creating a central bank of Africa, coming up with a unitary currency, and then backing that currency to the material wealth under the soil, they would have bankrupted every other economic system in this world from America to Europe to China. And that's why Muammar Gaddafi had to be assassinated.
Osama Bin Laden was a friend. Was an agent. Yeah. During the United States government under the code name Tim Osman.
With the Russians.
Yeah, the Russians. They needed to get in Afghanistan. They wanted to get the Russians out of Afghanistan. They called on Osama Bin Laden, and he said, "Okay, fine, I'll help you to get them out." And they gave agreements. They gave him money. They gave him intelligence information. The moment that happened, he got him out. He said, "Okay, good. Well, where's the end of your bargain?" They said, "Forget this. We're not going to give you nothing." Yeah. And that's what happened. And he turned on America. Same thing with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was a friend of America. He was a good friend of the Bush family. Yeah. They gave him money. He actually was built into military power with over $80 million. They did that for Saddam Hussein. He was given the key to the city of Detroit. I mean, let's be real here. What?
Which is part of the history of why we have beef with Iran as well.
Come on, bro.
We helped fund the Iran-Iraq war.
Come on, brother. He know what it is. Colonel Mummar Gaddafi, man, I'll be pleased with our brother, was not some dictator. See, it's funny how the media will make you look like a damn monster. Wow. American media.
When it suits, because America was in bed with Gaddafi.
Come on,
as
brother.
well at one point.
Come on, well, I'll just say this. Right. In Libya, number one, Libya under Colonel Mummar Gaddafi had zero debt. They had free education, free health care. If you wanted to go to school abroad, they would give you the money and pay for the tuition, and it would pay for your room and board. When you got married, they would give the family $5,000. If you wanted to own a farm, they would give you all the tractors, all the seeds, and the land to till that farm. Gaddafi and the country of Libya was one of the only countries on the planet that had zero debt, was completely free to do whatever they wanted to do. And that's why they called him a dictator, because he would not allow America to have access to that wealth. He was going to create a joint currency using the wealth under the feet of the Libyan people, the gold, the oil, etc., and the wealth of the nearly 50 other countries in Africa, and come together to create a African currency. That money, based on the African worth, would have bankrupt China's yuan, it would have bankrupt America's dollar, it would have bankrupt the European pound. So that was removing total neocolonialism from the planet. And they said, we need to get rid of this nigga now, because if he comes to power with those other 50 countries in Africa, we will have to bow to them. And we do not want to bow to them. That was what it was about, money, because Gaddafi was a friend of America. Interestingly enough, when America tries to say this person, that person is a dictator, that person is a dictator, the first question you need to ask is, hold on. What is it that that country has that America needs? That's the first question you need to ask yourself. America is currently over $60 trillion in debt. Make this very clear. America, if you look at Wall Street, they say a little over $22 trillion. But who do we owe? Y'all need to clap for that question. You need to clap for that. Ask it again. I have been waiting for somebody to ask you, because we know. And the Honorable Mr. Farrakhan has been telling it for a long time. The international banking families of Europe. You're talking about the Warburgs, the DuPonts, the Rothschilds. You're talking about the Carnegies. You're talking about those people who the Rockefellers. They own America after 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Act came into existence, and they literally are a gangster group that has nothing to do with the Constitution whatsoever. They took over the monetary printing of the money in America. That's only supposed to be given to Congress. They took over the continuous economic manipulation of America. So anything that happens in America goes through the international banking families of America, or Europe, pardon me. And they own America. They own most of the world, and that's who America owns. Exactly. International banking families of Europe.
So it's not even debt with China, it's them more than anything.
Let me just talk about that. Yes, America owes China over 1.1 trillion, they owe Japan over $1 trillion, they actually owe North Korea money as well. America owes over 75 countries money.
Okay, so all right, just for me.
Don't slow down, I'm talking.
No. Just for me, because I really don't know this shit. So what do? They go and say, yo, let me borrow $1 trillion? Is that how it goes?
They're like a humongous credit card to the world.
America is the biggest whore in the world.
God damn it.
The biggest oil junkie in the world.
Okay.
So America goes...
Those are whores now, so you know.
Yeah. I gotta say whore.
Talking about America's bigger than than Lucia from my hood. No, let me stop.
America were a woman, I don't think any man would want to touch her. I'll just say it that way. Respectfully to the sisters, just being real, paint picture. But America owes so many countries money, it's insane. It's really insane. So whenever she's talking about other countries and saying these are terrorists, see, you go to another nation that didn't invite you.
Right.
You try to have negotiations and tell them, listen, give us your oil, diamonds, etc. We'll have some negotiations. And they say, well, no, we don't want you to have that. You go to another one. And America says, oh, okay, cool. So America leaves, and what do? They send in agents through the CIA. They assassinate the leadership after they use the media in that country to turn the people against the leader of that country. Then it's called a coup. They assassinate the leader, and they prop up someone who was a CIA agent who they had trained to be the new person to run for the leadership of that country, put him in place, and then they have free access to the wealth that they already were trying to get in the first place. This is called a coup. America's been doing it for a very long time. They have murdered and assassinated leaders all across the planet.
Which Iran as well, with the Shah and everything.
The Shah. America is a gangster, brother.
In 2011, Obama does the absolute neocon play of saying, almost out of the blue, by the way, why don't we overthrow Bashar al-Assad, Syria's president? Well, that's a little damn weird, but suddenly you start hearing Assad must go. So flippant and flagrant, because remember what was happening in Syria, they did exactly the same thing in Libya. And you look at Libya, they decided to take out Gaddafi. Why? No one really knows.
He was cooperating with us at that point.
No one knows. There are 100 theories. The fact that there are 100 theories shows that the whole thing was bullshit. They misused a UN Security Council resolution to protect the people of Benghazi to launch a months-long NATO aerial bombardment of Libya until they brought down the government, unleashed war in Africa for the next 13 years until today. They do these things. Ordered the CIA to overthrow Assad. So that started in 2011.
But why would Obama want to overthrow Assad?
Because Israel has run American foreign policy in the Middle East for 30 years. That's how it works. We have an Israel lobby. We have this clean break strategy. We have a plan for 7 wars in 5 years. And what's interesting is they actually kind of carry out this madness. They don't explain any of it to the American people. They don't tell anybody, but you can watch step by step. We've had 6 of those 7 wars. The only one that hasn't happened is Iran. And if you watch every day now, the MSM, the mainstream media, is pushing for U.S. war with Iran. Netanyahu's pushing for war with Iran. They're really trying to get this started.
But you also recently said that the Middle East would be better off with Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, and Assad in power. How does...
I didn't say Assad, but we certainly have not gained anything with Gaddafi. And you look at what happened. I mean, look at Libya. Look at Iraq. Iraq used to be no terrorists. He would kill the terrorists immediately. It was like, now it's the Harvard of terrorism. Iraq. If you look at Iraq from years ago, I'm not saying he was a nice guy, he was a horrible guy, but it was a lot better than it is right now. Right now, Iraq is a training ground for terrorists. Right now, Libya, nobody even knows Libya. Frankly, there is no Iraq and there is no Libya. It's all broken up. They have no control. Nobody knows what's going on.
The world would be better off with Saddam Hussein
100%.
and Gaddafi in power?
100%. Now, as far as Assad is concerned,
what about the human rights abuses?
Let's talk. Well, you don't think they're happening now? They're worse now than they ever were. People are getting their heads chopped off. They're being drowned. Right now, they're far worse than they were ever under Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi. I mean, look what happened. Libya's a catastrophe. You look at our ambassador as an example, okay? Libya is a disaster. Iraq is a disaster. Syria is a disaster. The whole Middle East. And it all blew up around Hilary Clinton and around Barack Obama. It all blew up.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe. Once they lose trust in their leaders, in mainstream media, in political institutions, in each other, in the possibility of truth, the game's won.
So many people are probably already aware of this, but there are many people that I believe still are yet unaware. I myself just learned about this act here recently called the Smith-Mundt Act that was initially implemented in 1948 that allowed our State Department and our news media to engage in foreign propaganda, but it was prohibited here in the United States until 2012 when then President Barack Obama revived the act, and it was called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012, and it was implemented in 2013, and it allowed our news media to propagandize our news, which in other words mean to create a false narrative. Okay, and you can see how our news has taken a drastic change over the course of the past decade, because now we have a lot of so-called journalists that are very opinionated and biased when it comes to reporting. When prior to, our news journalists stuck with just giving us the news, the facts, who, what, when, where, how, sometimes why. But now you have a lot of biased reporting.
Smith-Mundt Remodernization Act. It's something that got slipped into the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act. He said he didn't know about it and kind of dismissed, the call. I followed up with an email, like I do a lot of times, because this matter is so important, and of course I've got nothing back. So I'd like you to just ask him about the Smith-Mundt Remodernization Act, and I just want to tell you briefly what that did is it allowed our State Department to use taxpayer money to disseminate propaganda within the boundaries of the United States.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled program.
Coalition said destroying Gaddafi was not their goal. Then why bomb his palaces? Now some officials have claimed that eliminating him was in fact their goal. Who gave them that right? Did he have a fair trial? Returning to the no-fly zone, the bombings are destroying the country's entire infrastructure. When the so-called civilized world uses all its military power against a small country, destroying what's been created by generations, I don't know if that's good.
And all of this falls apart in 2003 when Bush decides to invade Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein. This is something Russia was very much against. Saddam Hussein was an old ally of the Kremlin. He's not stupid. He makes the connection that at one point they're going to go from lectures to removing him from power, that regime change is going to come for him too. And this becomes the driving fear of the Putin regime. Mummar Gaddafi is toppled from power and is killed in a very public and humiliating way. And it started again as peaceful protests, but ends in Muammar Gaddafi being killed publicly. Putin watches that tape over and over and over again. It's all he can talk about for quite some time.
People of Ukraine, this is your moment.
If you're toppling Moscow-friendly leaders in countries that you wink, wink, you understand they're separate countries, but not in your heart of hearts, that's scary. And you know that they're going to come for you next, or you assume they're going to come for you next.
Ukraine will make Europe better, and Europe will make Ukraine better.
He freaks out. Yeah.
What?
He freaks out.
Do you respect Putin? I do respect him. Do you? Why? Well, I respect a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get along with him. He's a leader of his country. I say it's better to get along with Russia than not. Putin's a killer. A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? You think our country's so innocent?
I don't know of any government leaders that are killers in America.
Well, take a look at what we've done too. We've made a lot of mistakes. I've been against the war in Iraq from the beginning.
Yeah, mistakes are different than...
A lot of mistakes, okay, but a lot of people were killed. So, a lot of killers around, believe me.
Russia is leaving the West. I mean, it can't leave the West geopolitically because Russia's so big, it's half in the West and half in the unwest, right? Yeah. Geographically. But American foreign policy, NATO expansion, the unwise policies made in Brussels and Washington are driving Russia from the West.
No doubt.
And when you leave the West, where do you end up, Paul?
They are pushing exactly the kind of a line. Well, with China, of course.
And not only China, where else? All major powers that are not members of NATO, including Iran. So, when Putin came to power, he was very much in the tradition of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. He wanted a strategic alliance with the United States. Who was the first person to call up Bush after 9/11? Putin. And he said, George, anything. And if you go back and look at what the Russians did to help the American ground war in Afghanistan against the Taliban, whether you think that was a good idea or not, that ground war, Russia did more to save American lives, Russian soldiers, fighting men in Afghanistan, than any NATO country did.
No, Iran did more than any NATO country to help America.
But Russia had assets, unbelievable assets, and corridors for transportation, and even an army, the Northern Alliance, it had kept in Afghanistan. It gave it all to the United States. Putin wanted a strategic alliance with the United States, and what did he get in return? He got from Bush, the second Bush, more NATO expansion right to Russia's borders, and as I mentioned before, American withdrawal from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which had been the bedrock of Russian nuclear security for 30 or 40 years. He got betrayed. And they use that word, предательство. We were betrayed by Washington. This is serious stuff. The pivot away from the West begins there and continues with these crazy policies that Washington has pursued toward Russia. It doesn't mean that Russia is gone forever from the West. But if you look at the billions of dollars of investment, you look at which way the pipelines flow, you look at Russia Putin meets like 6 times a year, maybe more, with the leader of China. They've each called each other their best friend in politics. Trump meets with Putin, and we think, oh my God, how could he meet? I mean, it's normal.
Netanyahu just met with Putin. Nobody said a word.
But the point here is that Russia's been torn between East and the West forever. Its best policy, in its own best interest, is to straddle East and West, not to be of the East or of the West. But it's impossible in this world today. And U.S.-led Western policy, since the end of the Soviet Union, and particularly since Putin came to power in 2000, has persuaded the Russian ruling elite that Russia cannot count any longer, economically, politically, militarily, on being part of the West. It has to go elsewhere. So all this talk about wanting to win Russia to an American position that's anti-Iranian and anti-Chinese is conceived in disaster and will end in disaster. They should think of some other foreign policy.
I agree.
BRICS countries are, by and large, developing very rapidly. Look, if memory serves me right, back in 1992, the share of the G7 countries in the world economy amounted to 47%, whereas in 2022 it was down to, I think, a little over 30%. The BRICS countries accounted for only 16% in 1992, but now their share is greater than that of the G7. It has nothing to do with the events in Ukraine. This is due to the trends of global development and world economy, as I mentioned just now. And this is inevitable. This will keep happening. It is like the rise of the sun. You cannot prevent the sun from rising. You have to adapt to it. How do the United States adapt? With the help of force, sanctions, pressure, bombings, and use of armed forces. This is about self-conceit. Your political establishment does not understand that the world is changing under objective circumstances. And in order to preserve your level, even if someone aspires, pardon me, to the level of dominance, you have to make the right decisions in a competent and timely manner. Such brutal actions, including with regard to Russia and, say, other countries, are counterproductive. This is an obvious fact. It has already become evident. Look at what is going on in the world. Even the United States allies are now downsizing their dollar reserves. Seeing this, everyone starts looking for ways to protect themselves. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on transactions, freezing assets, etc., causes grave concern and sends a signal to the whole world. What did we have here? Until 2022, about 80% of Russian foreign trade transactions were made in US dollars and euros. US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar. We had no such intention. It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United States across the world.
Sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the U.S. political leadership. The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power. I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world. Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the U.S. But they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? It is about the emission. Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power. I would not like to use any strong language, but it is a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake.
We're not your little niggas. Like, for real, all that big homie stuff, that's for little niggas. Little niggas have big homies. We're not little niggas, so we don't even respect big homies.
Well, the petrodollar is dead. It just doesn't know it yet, but it's dead. The Saudis are cutting deals with the Chinese in yuan right now, using Chinese currency. The Chinese are some of the biggest purchasers of oil. If they're purchasing oil using their own currency, the petrodollar's dead. It's finished. Goodbye. It'll take a little while for the world to purge itself of this, but we are looking at the collapse of the American empire. It's happening right in front of us. And to be honest, it's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful. Because the petrodollar hasn't brought anything other than greed, American dominance, hegemony. It hasn't been a force of good. The petrodollar is supposed to be, if it's going to be a force of good, it's supposed to be the reserve currency of the world, a force of stability. But the United States has used that to leverage dominance over people, sanctioning people, or in the case of Russia, stealing hundreds of billions of dollars, stealing, theft, straight up theft. No legal justification for it. The United States just stole it because they can. Now, if you're another nation looking at going, wait a minute, you want us to buy into a system that's supposed to bring stability, but if we do something you don't like, you get to steal all our money. It doesn't work like that. It's finished. Goodbye and good riddance.